Chapter 9:16. The third wave of the Avatar crisis was getting more and more intense. However, Mordor City, which was far away overseas, seemed to have avoided this crisis, because during this period of time, except for a disguised bone demon, no other demons were found in Mordor City. There was no doubt about it. Demons were a group of very smart and cunning guys, and these smart guys would definitely avoid very obvious danger areas. For example, Mordor City, which was run by Sauron like an iron bucket. From the southern plains to the northern wilderness, the whereabouts of demons began to become more and more common. They bewitched people and provoked wars. Even Port Tylon, Shipwreck Bay, Raging Sand Island and other places on the south coast had traces of demons, but there were very few signs of demon activity in Mordor City. They seemed to be afraid of this place, and the increasingly perfect control system of Mordor City would not give them a chance to take advantage of it. This gave Mordor City a precious chance to breathe. When other places were in a mess, and even Glory City and Arendelle began to have problems frequently, the growth of Mordor City became more and more obvious. The speed of the foreign population began to accelerate. The number of refugees accepted by Mordor City was increasing. Almost every day, a ship full of foreign people arrived at Port Mordor. And now, in the west of Mordor City, the results of the third large-scale expansion had come out. Rows of neat brick houses extended all the way to the harbor. These houses were all of the same standard, so they looked very neat. They were all two-story buildings and each house had 3 to 5 families. The planning here was similar to the internal planning of Mordor City. There was a unified drainage channel and clean and neat gravel roads, which was very different from the dirty and messy residential areas of other cities. And this new residential area also inherited the good traditions of Mordor City. It was a felony to urinate and defecate anywhere in Mordor City, and it was also possible to be arrested and locked up for several days. At present, the residential area was mainly occupied by craftsmen and technicians. They were allocated a place to live for free, but if they wanted to obtain the property rights of the place, they needed enough wealth and contributions. Now the thing that the foreign population of Mordor City was keen on was to get the property certificate of the city hall as soon as possible. This meant that they had really integrated into Mordor City and had obtained a corresponding status in Mordor City, becoming a real citizen. According to this progress, it was estimated that the population of Mordor City could reach more than 300,000 this year. It was a relatively large and densely populated city in the entire material plane. The city hall had been making arrangements for logistics and distribution recently. When the population was highly concentrated, the demand for resources would increase. Although the products of Mordor City could still be met at present, according to the plan of the city hall in the future, Mordor City would definitely become a metropolis with a population of more than 1 million. So with the recent increase in foreign population, the officials of the city hall were considering a preliminary colonization plan. There were still many places in the outer islands that could be reclaimed. The city hall not only had to ensure that there was an abundance of food, but also other daily necessities. Even vegetables had to be guaranteed. Perhaps it was still not enough now, but the officials of Mordor could proudly tell others that this city had become the most civilized and prosperous city in the material plane through their efforts. The sense of honor from Mordor City had taken shape. Even the most rebellious Drow warriors tried their best to get the approval of others and become real citizens of Mordor. For example, recently a Drow warrior and a half-elf girl got married, and their wedding was even blessed by a priest. The pirates were worn down by order and they learned a little bit of courtesy. Although they were still rude and unreasonable to outsiders, they knew that they should show a certain amount of cultivation when dealing with the citizens of Mordor City. A stable life could change a person a lot. Old Peter was one of them. He was used to reporting to the barracks every day, going to the tavern for a few drinks in the evening, and then sleeping with his wife and children. This stable life did not wear away the hostility brought by more than 10 years of wandering and killing, but it greatly eased the violence in his heart, especially after bringing his old lover from Shipwreck Bay. When the first child was born, old Peter's hands were trembling. For the first time he knelt in the temple so devoutly, praying for the blessing of the priest of Lord Sauron and baptizing the little life in his rough hands. A man would not become weak because of his family. Old Peter's violence disappeared. His change was like a reef by the sea, becoming more solid and heavy because of the birth of a child. And when Mordor City needed him, he would not hesitate to sacrifice his life because of honor, because of faith, because of everything he had done for this city and this home along the way. All of this was worth protecting. He believed and firmly believed that even if one day he would die for Mordor City, his family and his children would be properly settled. Once the order was formed, It would affect the structure of the whole society. All the rules set by Soren from the beginning were maintained with power, blood, and killing. As time gradually brought better things to Mordor City, people began to understand and fear the importance of this order and the benefits it could bring. They began to take the initiative to maintain this order. Even the lower-class civilians in Mordor City who could not read a word knew the rights and obligations of a civilian in Mordor City. However, Soren's change to the world was definitely not just a little bit. After Mordor City had formed the situation he wanted, he began to further test the reaction of the whole world. It was on this day. The city hall of Mordor City suddenly became chaotic, and then a message was quickly spread out from various channels, causing many people to be shocked as well as merchants and nobles to panic. The abolition of slavery law. When Gloria learned about this from Soren, the smart and virtuous which could not help but be stunned. Have you thought it through? Gloria's expression was very serious, even more serious than when she fought against the gods. She said seriously, slaves have existed for countless years. Do you really intend to abolish slavery? If so, many nobles and merchants who have a large number of slaves who support you may oppose you. Fallen which stood aside without saying a word, but there was a strange light in her eyes. This was the irresistible charm of a man against the order of the whole world. Soren's expression was very calm. He nodded and said, "Yes. I've been planning all this for a long time. Now the development of Mordor City no longer needs slaves. What Mordor City needs are citizens, more enthusiastic and hopeful civilians. The existence of slaves is a great waste of manpower. I am going to issue an abolition of slavery law in the city of Mordor and abolish all slavery. As for the slaves of the merchants and nobles, I will compensate them at a certain price." There were many slaves in Mordor City. From the beginning, the number of slaves in Mordor City was extremely large, and Shipwreck Bay was a slave trading port. Soren started off with slaves. No one would have thought that this slaughterer, whose hands were stained with blood, would actually abolish the existence of slaves at this time. If Soren's law was carried out, Mordor City itself would give freedom to tens of thousands of slaves. This loss was very shocking. If the compensation amount was added, then Mordor City would directly lose more than 500,000 Kindler, and it was very likely to have a far-reaching impact on other places. Okay then. Gloria smiled, stood on tiptoe and kissed Soren on the cheek and whispered, "No matter what you do, I will support you. If you want to do it, do it. No matter what happens, I will always be by your side." The news of the abolition of slavery law had just come out. Merchants in Mordor City began to secretly transfer their slaves because they were afraid of losing their property. However, soon the next day the city hall of Mordor City officially issued the decree, and at the same time, it spread to other places at a very fast speed. It was like dropping a bomb in the already chaotic material plane. Even Princess Royal, who was far away in Arendelle, sent a message. "What do you want to do?" Princess Royal seemed to be puzzled by Soren's behavior. The goddess of agriculture was also puzzled and surprised. The serf system had existed for a long time. She did not accept or reject this system. What she never expected was that Soren would do this. For all of this, Soren was still very calm and he just said to himself, "What do I want to do? I want to change the whole world. Now is the time. It is time for the material plane to be destroyed and rebuilt." The belief of 3 million paladins. Some things no longer exist, some beliefs have faded away. Soren was in the dark and evil, but there were still some things he had to do. On this day, Mordor City was known by the whole world. Because on a sunny afternoon, the city of Mordor officially issued the abolition of slavery law, unconditionally granting freedom to all slaves, and buying the personal freedom of all slaves in the territory at the price of 1 to 3 Kindler per slave. Immediately afterward, the city hall began to register all slaves. They would become the lower-class civilians of Mordor City, with the right to freedom of life and the right to property protection. Whether they could become official citizens of Mordor City in the future depended on the efforts of these slaves. At least they now had a higher starting point than in the past. Abolition of slavery law, epic event. In the middle of May 1677, the Lord of Mordor City, the god of half-elves, His Excellency Soren, the Lord of Shadows, officially issued the abolition of slavery law, completely abolishing all slavery in the city of Mordor. This event had a great impact on the material plane. Many areas where slavery was prevalent were shocked by this, and some gods were vigilant about this move. The rules and order of the whole world were impacted, and the move of Mordor City to challenge the slavery system made many stubborn old powers and gods feel a trace of dissatisfaction. Legend level +100. Chapter 9:17. The slavery system was a serious hindrance to productivity. If the slaves were not released, there was no way to liberate enough labor. The future development of the city of Mordor needed a large number of civilians, not the worthless slave class that could only be sold as coolies. Sauron's abolition of slavery decree was like a heavy bomb thrown into the material plane, and even the glorious city was shaken. Because even the Lord of Light, who was in the lawful good camp, rejected the slavery system, but the church had never proposed such an idea. Even some paladins would take the initiative to defend the slavery system. Sauron didn't care about the reaction of the outside world at all. After he issued the abolition of slavery decree, he started the third census of the city of Mordor. All the slaves were liberated to the lower class. They would be registered in the population statistics of the city of Mordor. From now on, they would have personal freedom and property freedom. However, because they had almost no wealth as slaves, the next arrangement of the City Hall of Mordor was to allocate land to them. Every inch of land in the city of Mordor was very precious. Therefore, these lands naturally could not be given to these slaves for free. It was unfair to all the meritorious classes. The city of Mordor had reclaimed a large amount of land near the 12 large towns. These lands belonged to the city of Mordor, and now they were rented to all the slaves. The City Hall of Mordor uniformly allocated housing, farming utensils, and daily necessities to the slaves. But that was all there was to it. Too much kindness was easy to have the opposite effect. Sauron would only give them a chance to rely on their own efforts to fight for a future. All the housing belonged to the wealth of the city of Mordor. The freed slaves only had the most basic living area. All the farming utensils also belonged to the city of Mordor. They only had the basic right to use them. The slaves were still penniless. However, they could rely on themselves to earn and accumulate wealth. The land allocated by the city of Mordor only charged about 30% of the rent. That was to say, 70% of the income in a year's farming could be used as the property of these tenants. Of course, Sauron would not let the slaves be free. Freedom was only relative. Sauron had already arranged their fate, and they had no choice but to act according to Sauron's orders. This was because Sauron was a god of the lawful evil faction. The slaves became tenants. They had the right to farm the land alone and gain the foundation to accumulate wealth. At the same time, they began to pay taxes for the city of Mordor and solved the problem of the lack of a large number of civilian workers in Mordor. Under the slavery system, they had almost no freedom of life and property rights. They relied more on whips for labor. Now that they had property rights, the income from farming would be their private property, which greatly stimulated their enthusiasm. At the same time, the city of Mordor also opened up a more preferential policy for them compared to outsiders. The freed slaves could use about 1/3 of the wealth of the outside world to buy the ownership of residence and convert the land into private property. All of these properties had the title deeds of Mordor City. Being recognized by the City Hall was equivalent to having a firm foothold in Mordor City. Sauron's promises had been tested by time, so there was no need to doubt his words. The third census was done very quickly. The City Hall of Mordor City had long been accustomed to efficient operations. After the third census, the number of people counted had reached about 270,000. It seemed that the hidden population of Mordor City was really large. The blacksmith was stepping up the forging of farming tools. This time, the cultivated land of Mordor City had nearly doubled. Because of the abolition of slavery law, there were about 50,000 more farmers in Mordor City. At the same time, all 12 towns were operating. The deep plowing system was being popularized. Relying on the promotion of fertilizers, the grain output of Mordor City was estimated to be enough to support about 500,000 people. However, for Sauron, agriculture was only the most basic part. He needed to do more than that. Everything he planned so far was just to pave the way for a large-scale farm economy. When farming grew to a certain extent, what he needed to do was to liberate these workers and move them to other places. Slaves could only be squeezed a little bit of strength, but Sauron needed more. The morning sun shone. Kovano woke up at daybreak. He looked at the clean bed he was lying on. It was so clean that everything felt like a dream. He was a slave. He came from Shipwreck Bay and was bought by a merchant. He used to be a guard, but he became a slave because of a noble. Life as a slave was not easy. The merchant used a whip to urge him to work every day. The other 5 slaves like him were beaten and scolded. As a slave he had nothing. Even if his master killed him, he had no responsibility. This situation lasted until the abolition of slavery law was issued. At that time, the merchant wanted to urgently transfer him to the south coast and then sell him for money. Unfortunately, he was still caught by the guards of Mordor City. He was free. Everything was like a dream. However, freedom was relative. Kovano soon found that the guards did not let him go. Instead, they placed him and another group of slaves in a place called Autumnwater Town. A row of neat brick houses. Each of them had a house and were placed here. The next day, a man dressed as an official came over to count them, followed by the distribution of tools. Kovano thought that everything was the same as what he had experienced in the past, but soon he found that it was really different. No one beat, scolded, or urged him. Even if he was blatantly lazy, he would not be punished. Many of the slaves like him were at a loss. Some worked hard as if they were full of hope for the future, while some did nothing as if they did not know what to do. These days lasted for 3 days. Kovano did not know how to face the future, so he just did ordinary things every day. As a commoner, he started learning how to farm from a young age. 3 days later, the officials of the town hall appeared again. They secretly conducted a test for everyone. The slave named Nord, who performed the best, was given a cow. This cow was officially taken as his personal property after passing through the town's council hall. This made many slaves envious, because their own value was not even comparable to a cow. The man named Nord was even more surprised. However, soon, everything that happened next made the others feel uneasy. Another slave was expelled. He did not even do the most basic reclamation because he was lazy every day. The officials of the city hall deprived him of everything that Mordor City gave him, including housing, utensils, food, and clothes. Therefore, everything bestowed by the city of Mordor was taken away. This poor man was banished to the outside of the town wearing only a thin piece of clothing. This man didn't even have food for his next meal. No matter how much he cried and regretted, he was still thrown out by the guards. It seemed that he was completely left to his own devices. At this moment, everyone felt uneasy. Fortunately, the guards only chased away 3 people. No one knew their fates. They only knew that their living quarters, food, and clothes had been taken away. At this time, only then did the others realize how precious everything they had now was. They did not have to worry about hunger or cold. They could live in clean and tidy houses. As long as they worked hard every day, they could fill their stomachs. Kovano began to adapt to this change in fate. He gradually found that he seemed to have become a tenant because everything he did now was no different from a tenant. However, in any case, the status of a tenant was higher than that of a serf, and it was much higher than that of a slave. About a week later, the officials of the city hall appeared again, which made many slaves feel uneasy. They were used to the current days. They had a clean place to live, a strong house, and no longer had to be beaten, scolded, and whipped. Such days made them cherish it very much. Fortunately, this time the officials of the city hall did not expel others. They only took away all the children between the ages of 7 and 12, whether they were slaves or civilians. Then Kovano heard that there seemed to be a school in the town. And these children were gathered there to learn? Yes. Soon they learned that Mordor City was educating these children. This kind of thing sounded a bit unbelievable because in other places, only the nobles and merchants would receive formal education. Kovano felt that the owner of Mordor City seemed to be doing something great, but he knew too little and did not know what Mordor City was going to do. He just felt that the future was full of hope. In addition to counting the number of people, the third census also counted the age of all the residents. Then, under the operation of the city hall, all the territories of Mordor City, including Port Mordor, began to establish schools one after another. They taught the most basic knowledge such as arithmetic, literacy, reading, and writing. These basic knowledge were all taught to all the children of the right age for free and compulsory. At the same time, some huge and dense buildings began to appear in Mordor City. These 3- or 4-story buildings were placed in the south, and a large number of workers were transferred to work in them. No one knew what Sauron was going to do. But now Mordor City seemed to be a machine that was gradually running at high speed. P.S. Go to Beijing tomorrow to discuss something. Chapter 9:18. Rumble. The dull mechanical sound echoed in the spacious factory, and hundreds of young teenagers were busy in it. Most of these people were half-elves, and the number of humans was only about 1/5. Lot was one of the few humans. His father was a thief and his mother was a prostitute. Before coming to Mordor, he was in the Shipwreck Bay area. Now he was a worker in the second golem factory in Mordor. After coming to Mordor, he spent 3 months learning how to assemble a clay golem, part of it. Maybe it was the talent from his father, but he learned much faster than other humans, so he was honored to become a member of the factory. In the factory was a workbench more than 100 meters long. Lot was responsible for the arm part of the clay golem, and there were dozens of people doing the same thing as him. As for the other group, they were responsible for the legs and torso. The most complicated part, the head, was handled by the mysterious witches. On the wide workbench, Lot carefully carved the rune lines. Although he didn't know what they meant, he just had to do it according to what the witches told him to do. Every day, Lot had to complete more than 5 arms, which could bring him 3 silver dirhams, which was enough for him to live a civilian life in Mordor. The operation of the golem factory was like a huge machine. Each worker was just a part of it. They were responsible for their own parts, and the witches would finish the final work. Dozens of clay golems were completed in this factory every day. These golems were sent to the edge of Mordor. They flattened the mountains, filled the ravines, and leveled the land. Golems replaced most of the manpower. They could initially reclaim the land, and when the land had been flattened, it was handed over to the farmers to clean up the ditches and loosen the land. Lot had been working here for almost a month. At first, there were only a few dozen people, and then more and more people entered the golem factory. Now there were hundreds of people. He didn't know how many golems were made in Mordor, but he was afraid that there were more than 1,000. A large portion of these powerful fellows were stored somewhere. Perhaps one day they would be of use to them. Lot's biggest ambition at present was to further improve his skills. Because there were also technicians who made golems and iron golems in Mordor City. The former's income was 5 times his, while the latter's income was more than 10 times his. Moreover, such a person had a high status in Mordor City. Lot felt that he might become a puppeteer in the future because some talented people had been accepted as apprentices by the mysterious Eastern Witch. Yes, it was the Eastern Witch who rarely showed up but had a very high status in the city of Mordor. She was always accompanied by many delicate dolls, which looked just like a living person. My lord. In front of Sorin's study, a beautiful half-elf woman knelt before him. Her name was Vina. She was originally a noble in Autumnfall, but after abandoning her original identity, she joined Sorin's church and was now a core member of the church. She humbly knelt in front of Sorin and said softly, "The 3rd batch of golems has been completed. At present there are about 700 golems in the city of Mordor, and more than 1,800 are sealed in the basement." Sorin raised his head, looked at her and nodded, "I see. Prepare a batch of golems that have not yet been assembled and send them directly to my laboratory." Vina nodded, "Yes." When the half-elf left, Sorin raised his head, rubbed the corner of his eyes and murmured, "The blockade of the kingdom of God is still too serious. It seems difficult to send living things in." Just yesterday, Sorin tried to send the golems into the kingdom of God, but it seemed to have failed. Because these golems were directly erased as soon as they entered the kingdom of God, they could not help his believers to build the kingdom of God. So Sorin thought about it and prepared to change the way. He directly sent the golems as materials, and then let the souls inside reassemble them. As more and more souls entered the kingdom of God, although Sorin still could not enter the kingdom of God, he could perceive more and more things. Next, he needed to build the framework of the kingdom of God and make plans to descend into the bottomless abyss in the future. The kingdom of shadow. A clear lake was like a mirror. With the first large-scale reincarnation of souls, the number of souls entering the kingdom of God began to decrease. About 1 or 2 souls would be reincarnated in the kingdom of God every day. Some were believers from Mordor who died in battle, and some were creatures from other places who believed in Sorin. There were half-elves who died in Autumnfall because Sorin was in charge of the half-elves priesthood, and there were also creatures who believed in the shadow priesthood. There was even a wizard reincarnated in Sorin's kingdom of God. This was a shadow wizard with shallow faith. Sorin himself did not know anything about his life, but this guy automatically entered Sorin's kingdom of God after death. He transformed into a petitioner that was close to the shadow form, retaining part of his casting ability. His soul level was a little lower than the souls, but his combat ability may be much higher because he could cast a lot of shadow spells. Judging from these performances, this shadow wizard who reincarnated as a petitioner was a high-grade spellcaster before his death. Souls continued to enter. Some of the rogues who died on the continent would automatically reincarnate in Sorin's kingdom of God. Compared with the desolation at the beginning, there was now a simple camp near the reincarnation pool. It was not as magnificent as the kingdom of the Queen of Spiders. Sorin's kingdom of God had just begun to be built. This camp was the outline of a city, and now the number of petitioners gathered had reached more than 1,600. Becoming a petitioner was a new life. They had a longer life, retained part of the memory of their previous life, lived a new life, and integrated into the kingdom of God at the end of the second life. If there were no accidents, most of these petitioners could live for hundreds of years, and holy spirits were almost immortal. As long as the gods did not die, they were immortal. So for any petitioner, becoming a holy spirit was a very high pursuit because no one was willing to accept the fate of death. Priest. A team of fully armed heroic spirits approached the camp, and there were some captives behind them. These captives were all in the form of half-elves, but their minds seemed to be a little crazy and full of aggression. They were all petitioners of the original half-elven god. They survived the fall of the kingdom of God, but they were already crazy because of the power. In the faint golden light, there was a beautiful female priest. She had retained her most beautiful and healthy appearance when she was alive. When she was in the material plane, she was only a woman in her 40s. Her youth and appearance had disappeared, but now she looked like she was in her 20s. She had stayed in the most beautiful and moving period of her life. The priest looked at the captives in front of her and slowly said, "Take them to the reincarnation pool to be purified. Only the glory of the Lord can wash away the filth on them." The heroic spirits escorted these captives into the reincarnation pool, and soon the first captive was thrown into it. A faint golden light emerged, and the captive's body quickly changed from the state of being corroded by shadow energy to the appearance of a half-elf. His expression was a little blank. The second reincarnation made him lose more memories, but this did not affect Soren's control over him, because he believed in the god of half-elves. The number of petitioners in the camp gradually increased. There could be many kinds of life in the kingdom of God, and even humans could live in it. However, petitioners could not give birth to offspring, and other life forms could rarely enter the kingdom of God. The population of the kingdom of God was mostly brought in through the reincarnation of souls. Of course, if Soren wanted to learn from the Queen of Spiders and raise a large group of spiders, then the population of the kingdom of God would quickly expand. There was not enough manpower. The petitioner form was not enough to bring too much power, so when the initial construction of the kingdom of God reached a bottleneck, Soren began to throw in golem puppets. The first batch of golem puppets were all clay golem puppets, and there were about 300 of them. The parts were sent in through the passage opened by Soren, which required a lot of divine power. There were no problems. The parts of the golem puppets that were not yet activated were successfully sent into the kingdom of God, and then they were assembled by the petitioners and quickly turned into important labor. In just 3 short days, the trees near the reincarnation pool had been cut down, and then a wooden city was formed. In the center was a temple that covered an area of thousands of square meters. The petitioners were carving stone, and Soren's temple would be officially formed in a week at most. A god's kingdom was usually run for hundreds or thousands of years. Of course, Soren could not build everything from scratch, but now he needed a foundation, and then when the petitioners grew to a certain number, he would begin to take over other places, the original temple of the half-elf god, and the kingdom of the Shadow Lord. For now, in the kingdom of the Shadow Lord, there were still a large number of crazy shadow beings. Soren had merged 2 priesthoods in a row, and he had to wipe out all of them in order to complete the control of the kingdom of God, because all of this was taken from the hands of the other gods. Reincarnation, purification, cleansing. Soren must erase the traces left by the original god of half-elves and the god of shadow in this god's kingdom, and then mark all the petitioners with his brand. Only in this way could the god's kingdom be completely under his control. P.S. There is one more update. Chapter 9:19. Under the quiet night sky. Soren stood at the top of the wizard tower and looked down at the whole city of Mordor. The stars in the night sky were getting dimmer and dimmer. The power of the gods had declined very badly. Basically, most of the gods had fallen to the mortal world. After the initial careful hiding, some gods began to appear in the eyes of the world. The halfling divine system had moved to the Shire, the Lord of Light had completed the control of the southern region, the Queen of Spiders had unified the Drows in the Underdark, and the elven divine system had gathered together at this moment. It was obvious. As the Avatar crisis became more and more intense, the gods had a strong sense of uneasiness. Soren silently looked at the city under his feet. The city of Mordor was very quiet at night. There were no pedestrians on the streets, only the faint light of magic crystal lamps. Every once in a while a patrol would pass by. The devils could not find any opportunity here. "Haven't you slept yet?" With a faint fragrance, the figure of Fallen which appeared behind Soren. Soren did not look back but whispered, "Since I became a god, sleep is no longer necessary for me. Maintaining sleep is just a habit." Fallen which did not speak. She just walked to Soren side by side and whispered, "You seem a little confused." Soren was silent. Fallen Witch did not stop and continued, I can feel it. You are making a very important decision. This decision may change the whole world. You are a little hesitant. It seems that you know what kind of change your decision will bring. This makes you feel uneasy and hesitant. This is the first time I have seen you show such an expression. Do you know? I am very curious about what you are going to do. But I know I can't ask, but I will patiently wait for the day you tell me. Do you feel it? Soren was still silent. He was indeed making a very important decision, which would inevitably change the whole world. As the two women closest to him, Gloria and Fallen Witch, seemed to have noticed it, but Gloria didn't ask. The Fallen Witch took a deep breath. The night wind blew her long hair. She turned to the side and smiled at Soren. No matter what decision you make, she said softly, I will always be by your side. Maybe you don't believe me now, but one day I will prove it. The Fallen Witch looked at Soren seriously. Compared with the past, she had changed a lot during this period of time in Mordor City. She was less frivolous and more stable. Unconsciously, Karina began to have the air of a leader. She was no longer as paranoid as she used to be. She had changed a lot. Although it was indescribable, it could be felt. The operation of the elemental furnace has been completed. Fallen Witch didn't continue the topic. Instead, she said seriously, I need the core knowledge about elemental fission. If it can be successful, the energy generated should be enough to make the whole Mordor city float. But before that, I may need to leave for a while. Soren frowned slightly, turned around and said, Leave? Where to? Fallen Witch gently lifted her long hair, which was almost the same as Gloria's. She said slowly, Sigil City. Sigil City. The territory of Lady of Pain. Soren looked serious and whispered, Why do you suddenly want to go to this place? Although it has opened the door, it is still very dangerous for the outside world. Sigil City was a very special place. There were many terrible things in this city, some of which even the gods couldn't fight against. Fallen Witch said seriously, I need the knowledge about extra-dimensional fortresses. The closure of Sigil City began during the destruction of the Arcane Empire. There should be something I need there. As for a little danger, everything we do is risky, isn't it? Fallen Witch decided to go to Sigil City. This news was not good for Soren. But her decision was not wrong, because Sigil City did have what they needed. As a god, Soren had some places that were difficult to set foot in, and Sigil City was one of them. Lady of Pain did not welcome any gods. As a mortal and a legendary spellcaster, it was much easier for Fallen Witch to enter Sigil City than for Soren. I won't leave right away. Fallen Witch hesitated for a moment, then said, This operation is not led by me alone. The Eye of the North will also go with me. Many witches have lost their ability to cast spells. The Eye of the North and the Archmages of the Wizard Alliance will act together, hoping to find information about the Arcane Empire in Sigil City so that most of the spellcasters can recover their abilities. It was the aftermath of the collapse of the magic net. Without the magic net, the wizards could only move forward on the path of the Arcanists. The 422nd floor of the Abyss. Cursed Throat. The barbaric nature of the gnolls doomed them to be careless. Among the countless mortal slaves enslaved by the gnolls, some people were constantly obsessed with escaping. Yennegu's believers and other dangerous predators filled the ooze forest, and the greedy undead creatures of the Ghoul King bred in the Shrieking Peaks. So for the mortals who fell into the abyss, the safest way was to escape to the east and go to a violent yellow sea. This refuge was called Cursed Throat. Far away from the coast, a fleet of mortal slaves gathered for survival circled the coast back and forth to rescue fugitive slaves, or even mortal gnolls who were unwilling to submit to Yennegu's abominable demands. Although a sea beast caught by chance could feed the entire fleet for a month or more, their most common source of food was humans and meat. When food became scarce, the crew would isolate the weaker passengers and kill them, then use the corpses as dry food for everyone on the ship. Each member had to eat a small piece of flesh from their former companions to prove their loyalty and dedication to survival. But the real feast had not yet begun until some new refugees refused the gruesome meal. At this time, the nervous crowd would attack these cowards, with ruthless and cruel wildness, kill them and cook the corpses into the main dish. The leader of the Cursed Throat fleet was Malagasy Unos, who called himself the King of Cannibals. He commanded the large sailing ship Reaper in the center of the fleet. Every few months, Unos would lead his fleet away from the coast of Yennegu to the border of this floor, and then enter the abyss. There they constantly patrolled the sea, searching for more ships to join their growing fleet. At this time, on the border of the abyss, a large-scale naval battle was breaking out. The disappearance of the succubus queen gave the King of Gnolls a precious chance to breathe, and he realized that his enemy seemed to be in great trouble. This allowed him to launch a long-prepared plan to eliminate the rebel throat fleet and completely control the 422nd floor of the Abyss. This was a war full of chaos and violence. The King of Gnolls had been planning this operation for a long time, so when he encountered Uno's fleet, he quickly won an overwhelming victory. A large number of escaped mortal slaves were killed, and the sailors were slaughtered by the King of Ghouls. Inigo was very satisfied with this victory, but what made him dissatisfied was that Uno seemed to have escaped with his warship. The Sea of the Abyss was connected to the river Styx. Inigo did not like the sea, so when his enemy escaped into the sea, he had no way to stop him. But at least for a long time in the future, Inigo was sure that this annoying guy would not cause him any more trouble, and Inigo would have enough energy to expand his territory. The ruins of Azar, Barchid's End, Cursed Throat, Silent Prairie, Screaming Peaks, Seeping Forest and the Gathering Gate. The entire floor of the Abyss had completely fallen into the control of Inigo. Without the suppression of the succubus queen, Inigo's power was unprecedentedly strong, so he seized the opportunity to make himself stronger. He was ready to expand his territory. A huge map was spread out in front of Inigo. It depicted the various levels of the Abyss. The lower the floor of the Abyss, the more desolate it was. Inigo was not ready to occupy the lower floor. What he needed was the upper floor. The closer to the upper floor, the more souls there would be. These places were once controlled by other demon lords. The King of Gnolls thought for a long time, and finally Inigo locked his eyes on a place. The third floor of the Abyss, Forgotten Land. A floor that had not yet been controlled by a demon lord, near the top of the Abyss, and there was a legion of his old opponent, the succubus queen. This was an opportunity. A cruel smile appeared at the corner of Inigo's mouth. Through the Gathering Gate, he could quickly send the army to the upper floor of the Abyss. In this situation where other demon lords had no time to take care of themselves, the King of Gnolls thought that he could quickly occupy the Forgotten Land. Next he could aim at the Red Shroud, on the upper floor. A succubus lord that he hated for a long time. He believed that when the succubus queen returned, she would find that all her minions had been killed by him. The third floor of the Abyss, the Forgotten Land. The Golumba arena was expanding at an amazing speed, and the rise of the demon Sauron also made other demon lords aware of the emergence of a powerful opponent. The powerful enemy made some secondary demon lords try to unite together, which formed a kind of stalemate, but there was always a time to break the stalemate. Just as Sauron was gradually growing stronger, in the vast wilderness of the Forgotten Land, traces of gnolls suddenly began to appear. Many gnolls. No one knew when they appeared and no one knew where they came from. In just a few days they destroyed a secondary demon lord that occupied the northwest. At the same time, they expanded rapidly and attacked the fortress of the Succubus Legion. When the news was sent to Sauron, he just frowned slightly. However, at this moment, the high-grade succubus standing beside him could not help but tremble, showing a rare look of anxiety. Chapter 920. The sudden appearance of the gnolls alerted Sauron. Although there were no real demon lords on the third floor of the Abyss, there were still a lot of secondary demon lords, but these secondary demon lords were all in a state of disunity. When a large number of gnolls appeared, the secondary demon lords were in a mess, and some simply surrendered. These secondary demon lords were all fence-sitters. But the first 3 floors of the Abyss were very close to the bloody battle, and not all demon lords were afraid to fight against the Gnoll King. When the Gnoll army took down a fortress, their path forward was attacked. A newly promoted Sister of Glory led the Succubus Legion to attack them. At the same time, there were 3 other lesser demon lords participating in the battle. They were Sauron, the Baelor leader, and an 8-armed snake demon. There was no doubt that there were still many ambitious demons who were unwilling to submit to a Gnoll. When Sauron received an invitation from the Succubus army to fight against the invading gnolls in the Golumba arena, he did not hesitate to agree. The third floor of the Abyss, the Forgotten Land, was the key to his future descent of the Divine Kingdom. It must not fall into the hands of an enemy like Inigo. The mighty demon army began to gather. This was the first time that the Golumba arena had sent out a large number of troops. There were more than 100,000 demons gathered. Although the number of low-grade demons was large, there were still many middle-grade demons and demons among them. Your Excellency. An assassin demon appeared from the darkness and came to Sauron. He bowed his head and said, "The 8-armed snake demon army has arrived. But the Baelor army has not arrived yet." This was the frigid wind tundra. At the border of the Forgotten Land, the portal of the Knoll god Yeenagu was here. It could directly connect to the 422nd floor of the abyss. I see. Sauron frowned as he pondered. He then glanced at the two high succubus beside him. Not all of the promised allies had arrived. Something seemed to have happened to the Baelor's army. Accompanied by the glow of greater teleportation, a cold-faced succubus appeared in the camp. She bowed slightly to Sauron and said, "The Radiance Nun invites your excellency over for a meeting. The Knoll god Yeenagu is constantly sending troops here." Sauron nodded and led a team of guards to the succubus camp. There was a succubus legion in the Forgotten Land, the third layer of the bottomless abyss. Due to the disappearance of the succubus queen, all the succubus legions were fighting for themselves, with many Radiance nuns leading them to compete for status and power. And it was said that Sister Glory, who was in charge here, was a newborn. She became famous when she fought against the Knoll god Yeenagu. When Sauron arrived at the camp, he saw the newborn Sister Glory, Cridiana. As the daughter created by the Queen of Succubus herself, Cridiana had amazing beauty, but these were not the main points. The main point was that as a Sister Glory, she was currently the most qualified to lead the Succubus Legion. When Sauron walked into the tent, Cridiana, who was being observed, was also observing Sauron. The demon lord in front of her gave her a sense of familiarity, but she didn't quite remember why. It seemed that the other party's aura had touched a little of her memory, and some vague pictures flashed faintly. But when she turned her gaze to the high succubus next to Sauron, the Sister Glory couldn't help but tremble, and then she looked away without leaving a trace. Sauron obviously noticed this, so he turned around and took a deep look at the high succubus next to him. To be able to make the Sister Glory in front of him have such a big reaction, her identity was probably not that simple. "Your Excellency Sauron." At this time the eight-armed snake demon had not come over yet. Cridiana in front of him bowed slightly to Sauron and suddenly said, "I think the succubus next to you seems very interesting. Why don't you give her to me? I'm willing to exchange a succubus legion for her." I was discovered. Hearing Cridiana's words, the high succubus next to Sauron suddenly trembled. She could hide it from Rachel, but it was difficult to hide it from her own daughter, especially when she had just created her. Cridiana obviously felt something from her, so she suddenly spoke to Sauron. "Is there really something fishy?" Sauron was puzzled, but at this time he turned his head to the high succubus next to him and said, "What do you think? If you don't want to, I won't send you there by force." At this moment, Mechanut, who had turned into an ordinary succubus, naturally had some thoughts in her mind. She couldn't help but chuckle and said, "Since this Sister Glory values me so much, I don't mind following her. This problem must be solved." Especially when the Knoll god Yeenagu suddenly attacked, Mechanut thought for a moment and immediately made a decision. With Cridiana's recent birth, it was unlikely that she would betray her. At present, it was indeed not suitable for her to show up, so if there was an agent at this time, it should help her control the Succubus Legion. Unfortunately, Sauron should have been aware of her identity. Originally, according to her plan, she was going to use this demon lord well, but it seemed impossible at the moment. Sure enough, there was something fishy. Sauron immediately confirmed the guess in his heart. The identity of the high succubus next to him was not simple. If she was not another Sister Glory, then she must be the missing succubus queen herself. Otherwise, why would Cridiana go over when she saw her at a glance? Unfortunately, now was not the time to be entangled with this, because just when Mechanut stood behind Cridiana, another secondary demon lord, an eight-armed snake demon, had arrived. The three demon armies gathered. The other Baelor demon lord did not appear at this time, either betraying them or wanting to take advantage of the situation. Although the demon army fought very fiercely, there was also a drawback. That was, most of the strategies and tactics were not used. Once the battle started, it was either an overwhelming victory or they could only be left to their own devices because most demons would not listen to commands after entering the battle. There was no other way. Chaotic and evil creatures were like this. Therefore, the meeting of the three demon lords was also very simple. There was basically no need to discuss any tactics. They brought an army of nearly 500,000 demons. With such a large demon army, they only needed to push forward. The whole plan took less than half an hour to discuss, and then the three demon lords immediately decided to launch an attack in the afternoon and directly take down a fortress that was originally occupied by the Succubus Legion. Of course, the discussion of the attack actually took less than 3 minutes. The rest of the time was more to form an alliance agreement. Since they were going to help the Succubus Legion deal with the Knolls, Soren and the eight-armed snake demon naturally had something they needed. Soren really left the succubus queen disguised as a high succubus in the camp. Since discovering her unusual identity, Sauron felt that she was a ticking time bomb. Although it was still fun to play with her, a successful demon lord could not indulge in playing with succubus. Cridiana was very trustworthy. This sister of Radiance really sent a succubus army over at noon. There were a total of 121 succubus, among which there were more than a dozen high succubus. They were a regular succubus formation, which was just right to be commanded by the lady boss. This deal did not seem to be a loss. Using a total of succubus in exchange for a large group of succubus, even if they were just playing, they should be able to play for a long time, at least for the other demon lords. Succubus camp. When Sauron and the eight-armed snake demon left, Cridiana immediately knelt on one knee and said, "Mother, I have been looking for you for a long time. I didn't expect you to be here. Why did you suddenly disappear? Now the entire succubus legion is torn apart. The sisters are fighting for the power you left behind." It seemed that there was no way to continue the disguise. Cridiana saw through her identity at a glance, and Mechanut could only show her original appearance. With a dazzling brilliance, a graceful figure appeared. Her gorgeous red lips always had a raging smile, her long black hair was scattered, and her eyes were flowing with fiery red asterisk. Her wide wings spread out behind her, and sharp knife-like claws could be seen on the joints. A flat and slender demon tail had a curved thorn at the end. The succubus queen was wearing an exquisite silk robe with a studded belt around her slender waist. At this moment she was playing with a long whip made of fine gold thorns that could burst out electric sparks. This was her original appearance. Because the succubus queen Mechanut's disguise and performance ability was as high as more than 600 points, Sauron could not see through her disguise at all. "My daughter." The succubus queen, who had restored her original appearance, had her own momentum. She looked down at Sister Radiance in front of her and said slowly, "This is a special time. I need to use some means to make my enemies jump out so that I can destroy them." The Avatar crisis forced her out, although she also had her own plans. But at this time she must put on a confident look, so Mechanut said, "I can't show up yet, don't leak any information about me. The most important thing now is to defeat the Knoll god Yeenagu. The Forgotten Land must not fall into his hands." As an old opponent of thousands of years, Mechanut knew very well that if the Forgotten Land was controlled by the Knolls, the Succubus Legion in the upper two layers of space would be in danger. It might even threaten her important assistant, Red Shroud, who occupied the first layer of the abyss. Chapter 9:21. The mighty army of demons gathered together. Sauron's army was on the flank of the demon army. Compared to the other demon lords' armies, there were more demon mercenaries. The arms trade in the Galumba arena had already started. Through the Yugoloth network, Sauron even kept in contact with a big demon on the first level of the Baator Inferno. The equipment that was eliminated by the demon army was transported to Sauron's territory by the Yugoloths through the river Styx every once in a while, and then sold to other demons. This was the unspoken rule of the Abyss. Many demon weapons and equipment came from the demon's arsenal. Sauron felt good after sending away a ticking time bomb. According to his judgment, there was a 50% chance that the ticking time bomb was the Queen of Succubus herself. When he thought about how he actually slept with the Queen of Succubus and tried all kinds of positions, it was really King exciting. It was fine if he didn't know her identity, but after knowing her identity, Sauron would never dare to keep her around. In the afternoon. According to the agreement, the demon army launched an attack on the fortress occupied by the Knolls. It was an extremely strong steel fortress, and the walls had been solidified by blood. Obviously the Knolls paid a great price when they took it. There were about 20 to 30,000 Knolls here. Their numbers were far less than the demon army, but their quality was much better than the low-grade demons. Dong, dong, dong. Accompanied by the silent sound of war drums, the demon army launched their first attack. Sauron's figure stood at the back of the army, watching a group of Voros' army driving the Dretches forward. This was the usual tactic used by demons. They first sent a group of low-grade demons to die, trying to consume some of the enemy's regenerative power. There was no doubt. This tactic was very effective. Because when hundreds of thousands of Dretches were driven to the battlefield, the Knolls in the steel fortress could not help but become nervous. There were countless low-grade demons. Among Sauron's army of more than 100,000 demons, nearly 60,000 of them were reincarnated demons that had recently gathered in the wilderness. They were all free cannon fodder. Only demons that advanced through death and slaughter had a chance to rise. The sky was filled with arrows. These gnolls were completely different from the gnolls that Sauron had seen before. They were more like a real army. Under the first wave of attack, thousands of low-grade demons fell. The smell of blood filled the battlefield, and many drenched corpses were trampled into meat paste by their companions. Regarding this, all the high-grade demons did not seem to care. Even if the casualties of the dretches exceeded tens of thousands, they did not care at all. This was the bottomless abyss. If you don't want to enter this purgatory field, you either don't do evil while you're alive, firmly believe in a god, or make yourself strong enough. Life was so cheap in the abyss. After getting close to the steel fortress, the death rate of the dretches increased sharply. Suddenly, 10 to 20,000 dretches fell under the wall, and the pile of corpses was already 3 to 5 meters high. Some dretches tried to escape, but they were greeted by the grinning Hezru. These Hezru did not hesitate to tear apart the low-grade demons that tried to escape. Demons won't reason with you. Hundreds of thousands of dretches finally began to cause casualties to the gnolls, and the ghouls began to appear on the battlefield as a substitute. The gnoll god Yeenagu had conquered the ghoul king, so he had to face the disgusting undead creatures in every battle. After all, the courage of the dretches was limited. Even under the supervision of the middle-grade demons, when the casualties reached 30 to 40,000, a large number of dretches could not help but retreat. Tens of thousands of dretches were defeated from the front line, and there was no way to stop it. However, the other demons did not care because they had already exhausted the enemy's strength. With the defeat of tens of thousands of dretches, the middle-grade demons as the backbone began to gradually appear. The thick-skinned Hezru rushed to the front. They did not care about the arrow attack because as long as it did not hit their vital points, it would not affect them. The Voros and cunning Hezru wandered around. These demons were insidious and cunning when they were alive, and even more so after reincarnation. Behind them were the Hezru who were responsible for climbing the wall. These were the absolute main force. Basically, the Hezru were ferocious and violent mortals when they were alive. The challenge level of the Hezru was as high as level 11, which was enough to suppress the gnolls. Behind them were the judgment demons and curse demons. The number of these demons was small, and they were close to the strength of the high-grade demons. As support troops, they could attack the weakness of the gnolls at any time. At the end of the line were the six-armed Marillion and Baelor demons. The elite troops of the succubus army were also here, ready to attack the interior of the steel fortress at any time. Dong dong dong. The Hezru quickly approached the city wall. They roared and climbed up the wall. Their tenacious vitality allowed them to not fall so quickly. When they got close to the wall, they could pull the gnolls down with just a gentle pull. A fierce war of attrition began. Although the demon army suffered many casualties, the number of gnolls also increased. When the time was right, Sauron glanced at the 8-armed Marillion lord not far away. The 8-armed Marillion also nodded at Sauron. Then, the assassin demons and the 6-armed Marillion were sent to the battlefield. The 6-armed Marillion was born to be a killing machine. When they entered the fortress with the help of advanced teleportation, the gnolls' casualties began to increase. The 6-armed Marillion was born to be good at group battles. Dozens of gnolls besieged a 6-armed Marillion, but they could not gain the upper hand at all. Instead, they could not get close to the 6-armed Marillion at all. The assassin demons were the gods of death on the battlefield. Every time they appeared, a gnoll officer would be killed. To some extent, the middle-grade demons, including the Hezru and Berserk demons, were all cannon fodder for the demon army. The only difference was that the level of the cannon fodder was a little higher. The key to victory was these high-grade demons with amazing strength. It's about time. Sauron frowned and looked into the distance. As if he had noticed something, he ordered, "Attack!" With the dull sound of a horn, all the demons were sent to the battlefield. The demon mercenaries also began to participate in the battle. The demons and goblins had already begun to prepare spells. Boom! With the appearance of a raging fire, Sauron's figure directly appeared inside the steel fortress. He was shrouded in fire. He held a flame whip that was more than 10 meters long in one hand and a huge beheading sword that was more than 6 meters long in the other. Every step he took left a scorched mark on the ground within 30 meters. Many jackals were caught on fire before they could even get close to him, and then they were burned to death while howling in pain. Sauron seemed to have an innate advantage against creatures with long hair all over their bodies. A team of demon hunters was guarding Sauron. These were all demon hunters that had been converted in the past month. They were heroic spirits from the body of faith, transformed by the demon genes of the Baelor demons. They had inherited Soren's curved sword ability, could use sacrificial fire abilities, and could fly with the demon wings on their back. The only flaw was that they could not use greater teleportation at the moment. These demon hunters were all born with extraordinary dexterity. They wandered around Sauron and hunted gnolls. When the number of enemies increased, these demon hunters were all covered in fire. They looked like mini Balrog and their combat power had increased a lot. This was the first time the demon hunters had actually fought in a war. At present, Sauron had converted a total of 12 demon hunters. With the construction of his kingdom in the future, the number of demon hunters would gradually increase. Sauron could not always rely on the demon mercenaries. If he wanted to gain a foothold in the abyss, even ordinary demons were not enough to rely on. He had to have a demon army that was completely loyal to him and created by him. The demon hunters would be the core combat form of the future kingdom. What Sauron needed to do now was to gradually expand the scale of his reincarnation and figure out the parts that needed to be filled in the demon hunters. Finally, he would perfectly replicate them in his kingdom. The balance of the battle began to tilt. Gnolls died in large numbers, and ghouls were also turned into charcoal in Sauron's fire. The 8-armed Naga Lord also entered the battlefield. He bowed slightly towards Sauron, as if he was in awe of the power of the Balor demon lord. The 6-armed Naga was born lower than the flame demon, and even the Balor demons were not as high as the flame demon. Sauron had the advantage over the 8-armed Naga Lord. The gnolls began to collapse. When the death rate reached about 50%, the gnolls began to flee. The stronghold fell back into the hands of the succubus army, but at this time, a howl suddenly came from afar, and then a dense gnoll army appeared in front of them. The Gate of Assembly. The second army of the gnoll king Yenigu. If they had taken the steel stronghold a little later, when the reinforcements arrived, the battle would not have been so easy. When the gnoll reinforcements appeared, the succubus army urgently mobilized to defend the stronghold. But surprisingly, after the gnoll reinforcements saw that the stronghold had been taken, they gave up moving forward and retreated in the direction of the Gate of Assembly. They temporarily gave up attacking. However, the gnoll god Yenigu would never give up so easily. They must be gathering more troops. When the main force of the gnoll army on the 422nd floor of the abyss was teleported to the 3rd floor of the Forgotten Land, they would launch a fierce attack again. But this would take a little time. For Sauron, this battle was over. According to the covenant he signed with the other 2 demon lords, after repelling the gnoll army, all the land south of the bleak wind tundra belonged to him in name. This piece of land was about the size of 10,000 islands of Mordor. Although all the land in the abyss was desolate, if he occupied such a large territory, it was enough for Sauron to become one of the 3 demon lords in the 3rd floor of the Forgotten Land. What was more important was that, in this vast and desolate land, there were rich minerals unique to the abyss. P.S. I finally finished writing the manuscript. The update of the Abyss Lord is starting to stabilize. Chapter 922. South of Bleak Wind Tundra was mostly barren mountains. Even demons didn't pay much attention to such land. They preferred plains. Galumba Arena was built in the relatively flat part of the mountains. Because there was a mine nearby, the demons and goblins gradually grew stronger. But now all of this belonged to Sauron. The only threat to him was the sleeping abyssal demon dragon. If no one went to disturb this abyssal demonic dragon, then it ought to sleep for a period of time because everyone knew that when Long Yi fell into sleep, the time was counted in years. This abyssal demon dragon had been sleeping for almost 2 years so far. If it wasn't for the appearance of Sauron, perhaps it would have slept until the end of the Avatar Crisis. This might be the luck of the dragons. Because the duration of the Avatar Crisis was actually very short for the dragons. Many dragons unknowingly escaped the most turbulent period of the multiverse in their sleep. Naturally, the barren mountainous terrain had its advantages. Although there were no abyss worms and dretch that often reincarnated as souls, these mountains were very rich in minerals, and even copper and iron ore could be seen in the open. This was a great temptation for demons because they could directly mine the minerals, then make them into weapons and sell them to other demons. This time, the Demon Lord Alliance nominally gave 1/3 of the land of Forgotten Land to Sauron. But in fact, if Sauron wanted to control these lands, he had to do something very important, and that was to conquer the other strong people in this land. The Gnoll army had temporarily retreated. Yenigu was not an ignorant brute. After knowing that the demon lords of the 3rd layer of the abyss had united, he would certainly mobilize enough troops to launch another attack. The casualties of the Gnolls alone were too great. Yenigu was cruel and ruthless to other races, but he was very kind to the Gnolls. He would certainly gather the army of the Ghoul King as a consumption. In this way, other demon lords would have buffer time. The main body of the material plane was in the process of building the Divine Kingdom. Fortunately, the third wave of impact did not affect the outer islands, which gave Soren enough time to develop. The first place Sauron chose to conquer was the Abyssal Blood Pool. There was a very important place to the south of the frigid wind tundra. It was an abyssal pool of blood that was born in the mountains. This was an endless supply of troops, labor, consumables and cannon fodder. To any demon lord, occupying the abyssal blood pool was a very important part of their plan. Because this represented an endless supply of regenerative resources, he did not have to go to the wilderness to collect those wandering dretches. However, it was not easy to occupy the abyssal blood pool. As mentioned before, there was a creature called the Mother of Worms. It was a huge creature that had the power of a demigod and was responsible for guarding the abyssal blood pool. Sauron and the demon hunters came in a mighty manner. Because of the abyssal blood pool, the land here was dark red. There were many wandering dretches. They were a group of cowards. They did not dare to wander in the wilderness of the bottomless abyss. They could only wander around the abyssal blood pool, waiting for a worm that accidentally walked out, and then they would pounce on it one by one. The Mother of Worms did not allow other demons to get close to the blood pool, but it would not stop the stupid abyssal worms that ran out of its protection range. When Sauron arrived, he saw a group of dretches eating a few worms that ran out. Then he did not hesitate to recruit these cowards. The Galumba arena was preparing to mine minerals. He needed a lot of demon labor to mine. Dretches were weak, but they were only equivalent to demons. For humans, dretches with 12 points of strength were stronger than adult men. Sizzle. The arrival of Sauron instantly aroused the vigilance of the Mother of Worms. With a dull sound, the nearby abyssal worms dispersed. The Mother of Worms moved its huge body and appeared in front of Sauron. Boom. Sauron waved his hand and signaled the other high-grade demons to step back. Then he took a step forward and activated the body of flame. His whole body was covered in raging flames. This terrible flame made the Mother of Worms take a step back. I am the embodiment of power. Sauron opened the wide demon wings behind him. A flame whip of more than 10 meters appeared. The huge beheading sword was burning with blazing flames. He flew into the air and looked down at the Mother of Worms in front of him. He did not hide his power and fully displayed the pressure and strength of a demon lord. He roared at the Mother of Worms, "This is my territory. All demons must listen to my orders." The raging flames surged. Sauron waved his hand and a huge fireball fell from the sky. It directly blasted a huge pit beside the Mother of Worms. He roared, "Lowly worm. From today onwards I am your master. I will take over this abyssal blood pool and provide troops for my demon army. You must submit to me. Otherwise, you can only choose death." Intimidation. As a demon lord, Sauron could avoid some battles because intimidation was enough to deal with most enemies. The Mother of Worms trembled slightly. Facing the aggressive Sauron, it felt a trace of fear. After a long time it lowered its head. Then a row of data appeared in front of Sauron's eyes. Intimidation successful. You have successfully subdued the Mother of Worms, legendary creature. You have gained control of this abyssal blood pool. From now on, the Mother of Worms will not allow demons who are not loyal to you to take worms from the abyssal blood pool. You have successfully occupied the abyssal blood pool. The Mother of Worms' submission accidentally caused the abyssal blood pool to fall into Sauron's hands. He slowly descended from the sky, retracted the raging flames on his body, and walked near the blood pool. In front of him was a dense swarm of worms. These were the basic forms of demons. All demons could evolve from abyssal worms. They were the wealth of the bottomless abyss, collecting scattered souls for reincarnation. Having an abyssal blood pool was equivalent to having a treasure bowl for a demon lord. He could continuously harvest wealth and subordinates from it. Of course, the premise was that he could defeat the Mother of Worms. Come. Send troops to guard here immediately. Sauron quickly retreated from the abyssal blood pool. Because of his pressure, all the worms nearby trembled and shrank, branding the breath of a terrible demon lord deep in their souls. Sauron looked down at all this and ordered, "From now on, I want you to guarantee that a group of demons can be born from here every day. I need a lot of troops to strengthen my army." Occupying the abyssal blood pool was just the beginning. Sauron still had many challenges to conquer this land, and the next one was something very disgusting in the bottomless abyss. Boda corpse. This was a terrible undead creature. They wandered in the bottomless abyss and were full of hatred for all living creatures. Boda corpses would attack all demons. They were rarely enslaved by demon lords, unless the demon lord was also undead. There was such a group of Boda corpses in Sauron's territory. They were a serious threat to Sauron's wealth. Because many demons born in the wilderness who could be recruited by Sauron and sent to the mines to dig, were killed by these Boda corpses. It was not easy to deal with them. Sauron gathered nearly 30,000 demons for this purpose, and at the same time he also sent out some fire demons he created. Sauron was moving on the path of the Balor demon lord. During this time he had selected excellent souls and cultivated about 6 fire demons from them. As long as they were given an evolution plan, they could become high-grade flame demons. This was a fierce battle. Even if Sauron personally joined the battle, by the time these Boda corpses were eliminated, his demon army had lost nearly 10,000 demons. But it was all worth it. Because as long as the Boda corpses were eliminated, all the demons in the nearby wilderness could be recruited by Sauron, and this little army could be recovered in time. Sauron was cleaning up his territory. He needed to eliminate a lot of creatures such as demon-hunting spiders, twisted mortals, various undead creatures and wandering demons. Because it was close to the top of the bottomless abyss, there might also be traces of demons here. A large territory meant more reincarnation opportunities. While constantly consuming the demon army, Sauron also had a group of intermediate demons under his command because of the battle. At the same time, in the process of conquering these territories, the demon army under Sauron's command also became larger. After eliminating the third batch of undead creatures, Sauron's demon army had reached the scale of more than 200,000, although most of them were low-grade demon cannon fodder. At the same time, dozens of kilometers north of the Garuba arena, an abyssal mine led by Yugros and managed by the demons and goblins had already begun operations. Thousands of low-grade demons were sent to work in the mine, continuously transporting all kinds of ores. Some of them were sent to the arsenal opened by the demons, while the other part of the refined ores were sent to the Lord's mansion. No one knew where these metals went. They only knew that since the mine started operating, a batch of metals was sent to the Lord's mansion every day, but they had never seen any finished metal being transported out. No one dared to ask more. And the demons didn't care much about where these metals went. They only cared about how they had more power and could control more demons. The Lord had become stronger and how they could continue to climb up. The mines began to operate one by one. A large number of metals were forged into weapons, and nearly half of the output was sent to a place called Motor City. P.S. Yeah. Trying to recover and update every day. Chapter 923. Bertram felt that he had been crazy recently. He was an official of the City Hall of Mordor. He was originally a private teacher of a noble family near the south coast. He was expelled because he hooked up with the charming hostess, and finally became a pirate's military counselor. He was one of the first batch of officials in Mordor. Now his position in the city hall was equivalent to that of a supervisor. He still remembered the scene of going to the temple for the assessment when he was appointed. At that time he was really scared out of his wits, because a priest actually used a lie detection spell on him and asked him about his identity in detail. Originally he thought that it was impossible for a tainted person like him to become an official, but he didn't expect that he actually passed. At that time he was the one who hooked up with the noble woman, but he didn't expect that he would be the one who seduced the noble woman. On the surface, this aristocrat appeared to be sanctimonious, but in private he was full of evil tricks. The methods he used to whitewash himself were one after another. Anyway, he started to enter the city hall at that time and slowly sat up from a clerk. Maybe for the city of Mordor, they didn't care about using some talents with tainted experience. Bertram had a lot to do recently. He came to a warehouse in the south of Mordor City early this morning before dawn. There were already a lot of metal ingots piled up here, and there were 3 gray dwarves squatting and drinking next to them. Old Copper. Bertram greeted the leader of the gray dwarves in front of him and then said, "How is it? Have you finished counting this batch of metal?" Since last week, a large number of metal ingots had secretly appeared in Motor City. No one knew where these metal ingots came from. Bertram did not see any ships transporting goods from other places, nor did he know any trade news from other channels. They seemed to have come out of thin air, and then were assigned to him by the city hall to deal with them. As an old man in Mordor City, Bertram knew very well that he shouldn't ask too much or think too much when encountering such things that he didn't understand. He just needed to do the things assigned by the higher-ups honestly, because knowing too much about some things was not good for him. "I'm done." Since coming to Mordor City, Bertram found that the gray dwarves he met were drinking almost every day. Old Copper stood up, handed over a document and said, "There are a total of 6,720 metal ingots, thousands more than the last batch. But the craftsmanship of these metal ingots is still so bad. It's completely shoddy processing. Any dwarf apprentice can do it better than them. But there seem to be other special metals in this batch of metal ingots. I need to take them back and refine them. Maybe there will be some unexpected discoveries. The last batch of metal has already been smelted. You can send someone to the blacksmith to retrieve it later." Bertram nodded, then signed and sealed the document. The gray dwarves quickly got to work. With the help of a group of apprentices, they transported the ingots back to their base. "Boss," a drunken gray dwarf said, "there are many impurities in these ingots. However, judging from the characteristics of the mineral, it doesn't seem to be from our world. Because we can't even recognize some of them." Old Copper turned and gave him a cold stare and whispered, "Don't ask if you don't know. These metal ingots are not minerals of our world. They seem to come from below." Speaking of this, Old Copper pointed to his feet. Of course, he was not referring to the Underdark because the gray dwarves themselves lived in the Underdark. They knew almost all the minerals in the Underdark. He was referring to the lower plane from other worlds. The gray dwarf heard this and suddenly shivered. He then looked around nervously and stopped talking. Since these metals were not from this world but from the lower plane, no matter where they came from, there were too many things involved. It was better for them not to know. Bertram also felt that this batch of metals was strange, but he was a smart person. He knew what to ask and what not to ask. After handing over this batch of metals, he immediately took people to the blacksmith. The second refining of the metals was neatly prepared. The steel was sent to the golem factory, the special metals were sent to the witch's residence, and the other batch was sent to the construction department of the city hall. Recently, when a new batch of buildings was being built in Mordor, steel seemed to be integrated into them. A steel bar as thick as a finger was poured together in the building, which could greatly increase the firmness of the building. After all this was done, it was already afternoon. Bertram was so tired that he was sweating profusely. He felt that he should go to the city hall tomorrow to request for more manpower, as the amount of metal delivered increased with every batch. At this rate, he wouldn't be able to handle it alone. Mordor City. Study. A half-elf woman with an elegant face who looked about 30 years old stood in front of Soren. She was one of the officials of the city hall. It was different from other places. Maybe it was Soren's personal concept, or maybe it was because the witches here had sovereignty. Mordor City allowed women to be officials, of course. They must have the corresponding knowledge. The half-elf lady in front of him was one of the candidates who passed the assessment. She was originally the mistress of a noble family in Autumnfall. "My lord." The half-elf lady in front of him rolled her eyes. She did not dare to look at Soren directly, but her eyes flickered a little. She whispered, "The third batch of metal ingots has been delivered." The gray dwarves found some rare metals associated with them, and a small amount of fine gold was found in the third batch of ingots. The production of the steel golem is on track. The current supply of metal ingots is enough to last until next month. This is the document of statistics. My lord, you can have a look. Soren took the document and glanced at it, then handed it back and said, "Very good. I'll leave this to you. I'll mobilize some people from the city hall to be your assistants. If there's nothing else, you can go." The beautiful half-elf lady took the document respectfully. Her eyes stayed on Soren's body for a moment, then she bowed her head and left. As the master of Mordor, the master of the shadows, the protector of the half-elves, and a true god walking in the mortal world, there were many beautiful half-elves who wanted to climb into Soren's bed. Soren was not surprised by this, but he would not care about it. He knew very well what the mortals wanted. Just his immortal life and youthful appearance alone were enough for many noble ladies to think of ways to climb into his bed and deliver themselves to his door, naked and naked. But Soren had gradually adapted to the identity of a god. Unless there was a good enough candidate, it was almost difficult for him to be tempted. Sometimes it was like this. Before Soren became a god, someone could easily walk into his life and become an important person around him. But if he missed this opportunity, it would not be so easy to get close to him again. The iron golem has started to operate. Soren sorted out the documents in front of him and then said to himself, according to the historical progress, there will be 3 months before the fourth wave of elemental turmoil. More than half of the Avatar crisis has passed without us noticing. The gods were still trying to restrain themselves, but this restraint could not last long. With the appearance of the four main elemental gods, the real war of the gods broke out. The confrontation between wind and earth. The collision between water and fire. The four main elemental gods had a congenital rejection. The first to fight were the water elemental god and the fire elemental god, followed by the wind elemental god and the earth elemental god. The struggle of the four elemental ancient gods directly provoked the nerves of all the gods, and led to the outbreak of the war between the divine systems again. Unlike other gods, the four elemental ancient gods really did not care about the life and death of the material plane. Because they themselves did not have many believers in the material plane. They rarely left the elemental plane, so when they met in the material plane, it was almost like Mars colliding with the Earth. We need more golems. Soren fell into deep thought and murmured, the army of Mordor City can fight against mortals, but they can't fight against the real Devil Legion. We must build the Golem Legion during the Arcane Empire. Only in this way can we prove that we can fight against the devil. Maybe it's time to contact the Thaling in the mechanical realm of Nirvana. Soren had foreshadowed a long time ago. He had allowed the tower spirits to leave freely so that he could borrow their power when necessary. The Abyss, the third layer, the Forgotten Land. The demon Sauron sat on the throne of the magnificent palace. On his left and right were two beautiful succubus who were serving as vases and maids. They knelt at the feet of Sauron obediently, rubbing his shoulders and legs from time to time, and bringing food and wine to his mouth. In front of Sauron was the demon goblin warlock, who was currently responsible for most of the accounts of the Golumba arena. The Western Mine needs 3 times more manpower. Sauron looked down at the demon goblin in front of him, and the Yugoloth next to him, and said in a deep voice, "My servant found some adamantine in this mine. It can make us better weapons. Now I appoint you as the manager of the Western Mine. You will lead the more than 30,000 demons of the 6th Legion. My request is to increase the output of the Western Mine by more than 3 times within a week." It turned out that it did not do anything wrong. The demon goblin warlock was relieved when he heard the words, and quickly expressed his loyalty. "Your Excellency. There is no problem. I'll bring people over now." It was just adamantine. It thought that it was a little financial embezzlement that was discovered. It seemed that it had to be more careful in the future. Chapter 924. Pure black or white was not a good thing for the whole world. Just like Soren, although he admired the lofty faith of the God of Light, he would never agree with his ideas. Even the daughter of the God of Light, the goddess of agriculture, who inherited the priesthood of the Mother of Earth, could not agree with this. If this was not the case, the goddess of agriculture would not have another set of gods of her own. The devils were always so careful. After the tentative attacks began to be counterattacked by the churches of the gods, their little tricks immediately reduced a lot. Unlike the ancient elemental gods, the churches of the other gods were basically in the material plane. The material plane was a very important source of their believers. So the gods, whether good or evil, maintained the same general direction. That was, they must never let the material plane fall into the control of the devils. It was a peaceful night. Soren did not know when he became more and more accustomed to watching the stars at night because it could tell him the current situation of the gods. The stars in the sky were dim. Although there were not many battles during this time, there were still gods with weak divine power who fell one after another. For example, Juraglin, the god of death of the halfling. He fell. Without any warning, his fall seemed to be related to Naruto. Naruto was known as the enemy of good, the abomination of life, the bringer of darkness, the king of gloom, and the reaper of flesh and blood. His faith in the material plane was mainly distributed in the desert area. He was not a god who used the material plane as the main source of faith. Naruto also had his own churches in other planes. Just like almost most of the drows believed in the Queen of Spiders, Lolth, if there were traces of drows in other planes, they would also bring Lolth's faith there. Priesthood plunder was the main theme of the Avatar Crisis. As a mid-level god, as long as Naruto was given a chance, he could kill other gods who were in charge of death. It was obvious. He seized this opportunity, but he also angered the main god of the halfling. Perhaps because the main faith was not in the material plane, Naruto was not too afraid of it. As for the traces of other gods, it was not clear, but it was said that there were traces of the crocodile god in the northwest. Mordor City was like a strong fortress. The Abyss had entered an important buffer period. Before Yeenagu, the Knoll god, launched another attack, Soren had enough time to do something else. His destination was the mechanical realm of the clock's Nirvana. It was a world that he had planned for a long time and only had time to go to today. More importantly, he learned about the ancient god's corpse from the Githyankis. This was a very important source of divinity for Soren. A well-preserved ancient god's corpse could give him a lot of divinity. Astral teleportation. Soren's figure appeared in the astral plane along with the radiance of divinity. The gods were naturally knowledgeable about planes. He easily locked onto the mechanical realm of nirvana and used his divine power to teleport to the vicinity of this plane. Mechanical nirvana of clockwork. This was a plane of ultimate order. It was the birthplace of all planes of order. It was the machine that adjusted the multiverse. It was said that its birth was related to the original, time law of the multiverse and represented the highest standard of order. Looking down at the entire mechanical realm from the astral plane, its shape was like a water droplet-shaped clock, and it had an obvious tree-shaped domain. Note, the mechanical realm is occasionally called the Tree of Time. In the mechanical realm, each law constituted an independent gear kingdom, and all operations rotated according to their own rules. Each cog acted on a huge amount of computing data. Except for those puzzling legal functions, even the divine powers could not understand the effect of these data. The mechanical realm was the straightest and flattest of all the outer planes. It was like a huge machine created by an unknown existence, operating according to a specific law. This plane was not as natural as other worlds because at a glance, one could feel a very strong sense of structure. It was said that there was a great divine power called the Lord of Time. They might still exist or they might have died. At least the gods had not seen them, and the mechanical realm of nirvana of clockwork was said to be their masterpiece. Generations of arcanists had tried to find the most original mystery from it. Soren entered the interior of the mechanical realm. It was not much different from other planes. The mechanical realm had a unique gravity characteristic, which meant that the gravity of the entire mechanical realm was different. Some places were close to the gravity of a material plane, and some places were more than 10 times the gravity of a material plane. If one did not have the strength of a legendary level, it was extremely difficult to even walk in some places of the mechanical realm. This was also why Soren had not entered the mechanical realm until now. Although it was related to time, and the entire plane was like a clock, in fact, the flow of time in the mechanical realm was the same as in other planes. There was no sign of time passing too fast or too slow. In theory, the space in this plane was infinite. Although the gears in the mechanical realm were limited, the characteristic of this plane was that it could be expanded infinitely. It was made up of countless gears, and the smallest one was the size of a standard island. It was unknown how amazing the power was to be able to create such a plane. Large and small gears and parts made up the clock, and the size of the clock was about the same as the continental shelf of Asia. Some useless gears floated around the mechanical realm. There were some void creatures living on them, and they were full of hostility toward outsiders. This was a plane that completely distorted the concept of reality. If visitors from other material planes came, everything they knew would be overturned. The entire mechanical realm was fixed with spells. At least the power of lesser divine power was needed to change the mechanical realm. Ordinary things had to be changed with spells and physical effects. The characteristic of the mechanical realm was time. However, no one knew how to trigger it, so this plane had no elemental or energy characteristics. In the mechanical realm, there was a strong tendency toward order. Anyone who was not in the lawful camp would receive a negative effect of -2 in all charm, wisdom, and intelligence. In other words, this plane was very extreme, and was very unfriendly to the neutral camp and the chaotic camp. The magic characteristics of the mechanical realm were normal, and most spells could be cast normally. The place Soren arrived at was a very large gear. The area was almost the size of a kingdom, and there was a portal in his sight. These ancient portals were scattered all over the mechanical realm. Some were damaged, but some were still functioning. Some of the ancient constructs were still maintaining the normal operation of the mechanical realm. They would repair these portals regularly, and the natives were able to reach the other gears through the portals through the connection between the gears. The portals here were connected to the outer plane in the astral space. Half of the time, there was a green light around the portals, similar to gears and slowly rotating rings. This represented the purpose, direction, and position of the portal. One had to have more than 350 knowledge and had studied both the astral space and the mechanical realm to be able to understand these words and understand where the portal led to. At the same time, many portals opened according to time. The entire mechanical realm was like a huge clock, and when it ran to a certain time, some portals would open. Once it appeared, the opening of the portal would usually remain for at least an hour, and it could last for as long as 24 hours. It was extremely dangerous to casually teleport in the mechanical realm. The natives of the mechanical realm were building their homes on the cogs in the void. There were usually no wild animals or plants on the surface of the cogs, but colonists from various planes, including the main plane, the Nine Hells, Mountain Paradise and other planes, had transformed the surface of the cogs where they were into various mazes, gardens and nature reserves. In other words, the entire mechanical realm was a huge mechanical clock. Most of the animals, plants, and even the soil on the surface were brought over by the natives who had migrated here over a long period of time. Almost all the natives living in the mechanical realm were not complete real creatures. They were constructs. Of course, there was another very dangerous creature here, the Fermi ant tribe. Their nest ran through the entire mechanical realm. These ant-like creatures looked for all the colonies they could see, and then like worker bees, they swallowed everything living on them into their nest and made these things obey the laws of their queen. This branch of the astral insect tribe was the #1 killer in the mechanical realm. Soren encountered one of them. As the soil was turned over, a creature that looked like a giant ant appeared in front of him. After seeing Soren, it panicked a little and seemed to want to immediately drill back into the ground. But Soren would not give it the chance. With a flame arrow, Soren directly nailed it to the ground. The Fermi ant tribe was a very troublesome creature. Often if one was let go, it would attract a large group. There were a small number of petitioners in the mechanical realm. The probability of encountering them was not high, just like how there were very few gods who had attached their kingdom to this plane. Vision in the mechanical realm was normal. The daytime in this plane was lit up by a sudden light from the void for 12 hours, and then it was completely dark for 12 hours. Hearing here was also normal, although sometimes there was a rumbling sound caused by the rotation of the cogs on the edge of the ground. Note, some planes' hearing and vision will be distorted. There was a type of building here called the nest cogs. They were the base of the Fermi ant tribe. Nest cities made of excellent buildings existed on the surface of the cogs and their colonies. Every colony kept thousands of workers, warriors and foremen, as well as a dozen or more Fermi ant guards. No matter the situation, every cog only had one queen, and their orders were the absolute law of the cogs. There was a very special existence that must be mentioned here. That was the mother of all ants. In the mechanical realm, there was an empire ruled by the Fermi ant tribe. They were constantly building colonies on the cogs of the mechanical realm, and a large number of Fermi ants lived on them. And in the heart of the Fermi ant tribe's empire, there were all the important colonies around the cogs, and the mother of all ants lived at the core. All the Fermi ants believed that the cog where the mother of all ants was at least 3,000 miles in diameter, and this cog was the core of all the cogs in the mechanical realm and moved the other cogs. Whether it was a fact or a simple belief, the two sides of the core cog were covered with a solemn nest city, and the surface was covered with a godlike light. The mother of all ants claimed to be a mid-level god, and although this claim was difficult to verify, the 33 highest-level Fermi ant queens always followed the mother of all ants to protect the safety of this ruler of the ants. The mother of all ants was Soren's biggest threat in the mechanical realm. This false god that claimed to have mid-level divine power had an inestimable strength, and alerting it would bring a lot of trouble to Soren. The mechanical realm of Nirvana was one of the ancient battlefields of the Order gods, so there were many corpses of ancient gods that appeared here in history, and at the same time, another special creature was born, the Faceless. Most of the Faceless wandered in the astral plane, but the chances of encountering them in the mechanical realm were also very high. These terrifying divine creatures were born from the flesh of ancient gods, and no one knew how they were born. But if a Faceless was born, then the ancient god's corpse floating in the astral plane would gradually disappear. P.S. Please recommend me. Chapter 925. Exploring the mechanical realm was full of unpredictable accidents. This was because the land that made up the mechanical realm was made up of huge gears, and these gears moved slowly. Soren was here for the knowledge left behind by the Arcane Empire, as well as the bodies of the ancient gods that were floating around the mechanical realm. Therefore, he did not want to deal with the Fermi ants, nor did he want to meet the legendary mother of ants. The ants were very difficult to deal with among the insectoids, and they were even more dangerous than the mutated insectoids at the bottom of the abyss. However, after just a few miles, Soren encountered the Fermi ants again. This time they were not workers but Fermi ant warriors. There were more than 10 of them, and it was impossible to kill them with spells alone. Soren directly took out his curved sword and killed them all in a second. What's going on? Did I descend to the Fermi ants' gathering place? Soren obviously felt that something was wrong. It was rare to see groups of Fermi ant warriors in the wild, unless they wanted to colonize this place. The Fermi ants liked to expand their territory. They would occupy one gear after another and then turn it into their own colony. If it were not for the other races restraining them, the Fermi ants could have occupied the entire mechanical realm. What's this? Soren suddenly found a small emblem next to the Fermi ants' corpses. This emblem looked very special and it was a bit like the symbol of a monk sect. However, Soren knew that this was not a monk sect like the one in the material plane, but a sect of another kind of creature. It seemed that some of them also lived in the mechanical realm. Soren quickened his pace. Sure enough, there were many traces of battle ahead. Soon he saw many Fermi ant corpses as well as another kind of thinner people. Githzerai? Soren bent down to look at the corpses. The Githzerai were a bit similar to the Githyankies, but they were a race that worshipped monks. There were many monks among the Githzerai, and they were monks with psionic powers. The Githzerai were born psionic monks. This area seems to be a gathering place for the Githzelii. Just by looking around, Soren could vaguely guess something. This was because there were buildings that were destroyed by the Fermi ants. It was clear that the expansion of the Fomite colonies had affected the homeland of the Githzerai, and conflict inevitably broke out. The Githzelians were very strong. There were at least a dozen Fomite corpses next to each Githzelian's corpse. But there were too many Fomites. According to the traces of the battle, the Githzerels should have been forced to abandon their homeland and retreat to the north. Soren stood where he was and thought for a while. Then he walked towards the north as well. The Githzerii were a rare race. He had never seen a living Githzerii with his own eyes. The footprints on the ground were getting more and more chaotic. It seemed that the retreating Githzerians were being chased by the Fomites. Soren couldn't help but quicken his pace and then directly used fly. Sizzle. After moving forward for dozens of kilometers, Soren finally saw the Githzelians, but the battle was coming to an end. More than a dozen Githzelians were surrounded by hundreds of Fomites. Hundreds of people had already fallen on the ground, and even more Fomites had died. The fighting style of the Githzelians was very similar to that of the monks, but they could use psionic powers to fight. They also had some astral abilities and teleportation abilities. If there were no accidents, these Githzelians would eventually be all killed by the Fomites. Soren thought for a while and finally decided to make a move. He quietly slipped into the shadows, and then lurked close to the general of the Fomite ants. This kind of ant was very obvious. It was like the leader of a group of ants. Its body and head were much bigger. Shadow strike. There was no fanciful fighting. Soren just cut off the head of the ant general with one strike. Then the Fomites couldn't help but fall into chaos. At this time, Soren also appeared. In the blink of an eye, more than a dozen Fomites had fallen under his sword. The Fomites were in a panic. The invincible enemy made them feel afraid. When hundreds of Fomites died under Soren's sword, they finally began to retreat. On the other side, the surviving Githzelians had been staring at Soren as if they had seen a monster. They just watched Soren single-handedly defeat hundreds of Fomites. "Thank you for your help, sir." After defeating all the Fomites, an old Githzelian came in front of Soren. He put his hands together and said respectfully, "Thank you for saving my people." Sure enough, it was the style of a monk. The Githzelians were composed of sections. Just like the astral fortress of the Githzelians were composed of different factions of monks. "It's no trouble." Soren smiled and nodded slightly. Then he looked at them and said, "This should be regarded as a new colony by the Fomites. They won't give up easily. They should be back soon. It's better for you to move to another place." The old Githzelian nodded, then looked at the bodies of his people with a sad face. However, he believed in the teachings of the monk after all. He quickly collected his emotions and said, "Sir, you seem to be from another plane? Is there anything I can do for you?" The Githzelians didn't like to owe people favors. It seemed that people in the Order faction didn't like to owe people favors. Soren thought for a while and said, "I was asked by a friend to find some ruins related to the Arcane Empire in the mechanical realm. Do you know where it is?" During the Arcane Empire, there was a floating city in the mechanical realm. The Githzelian elder hesitated and said slowly, "The ruins of the Arcane Empire? Are you looking for the floating city?" The floating city fell in a city south of the Fomites. It has now become the base camp of the Fomites. There are probably tens of thousands of Fomites there. I don't recommend you go alone. Sure enough, the ant race which was everywhere was a problem. After hearing this, Soren couldn't help but frown, then nodded and said, "I understand. You should leave quickly. The fomites should be back soon. After that, he turned and walked in the other direction. If the floating city really fell in the city of the fomites, then it was very unwise for Soren to go alone because he wouldn't be able to bring anything back. However, he had already left some clues in the mechanical realm. It was very difficult to clean up tens of thousands of fomites, but it shouldn't be too much of a problem if he could borrow some strength. Looks like I'm going to find those Thaling. Thaling were very high-level Thaling life forms. In the mechanical realm, there were all kinds of metals and parts. There were many Thaling life forms here, and there were also special reapers. If these Thaling life forms wanted to gain a foothold in the mechanical realm, they would have to be integrated into the Thaling life forms. With their abilities, they could quickly create a batch of Thaling puppets in the mechanical realm. There must be a queen in the city of the fomites. What Soren had to do was to deal with the queen, and then find other ways to deal with the other insects. If that didn't work, he could only teleport the golem army from Mordor City. He just didn't know if the alchemy tree in Mordor City could complete the interplanar teleportation battle. Soren thought about it seriously and felt that he should see if there were any other residents nearby. If he could provoke them to counterattack the fomites, it would greatly reduce the number of troops invested. Because in the mechanical realm, there were creatures from other planes. Angels, devils, blue dragons, green dragons, mind flayers, etc., could all live in the mechanical realm. However, according to Soren's habit, he still had to prepare a backup plan. So he transferred his mind to the third layer of the abyss, where the demon incarnation Sauron was. Although the mechanical realm was very unfriendly to the demons of the Chaos faction, if he could summon a demon army, it should solve a lot of problems. The third layer of the abyss, the Forgotten Land. After a slow accumulation and the power buff brought by the crazy expansion of the territory, Sauron finally had a qualitative change. Name Sauron. Race, demon. Form, Baelor, grade 6. Large otherworld creature, interplanar, evil, level. Creature level 27 attributes. Strength 37, Dexterity 25, Constitution 31, Intelligence 24, Wisdom 25, Charm 30. Alignment, lawful evil. Note, other demons will be slightly hostile to your actions. Health, 545545 Demonic power, 300610000 Domain. Rage, evil skills. Sneak 285, Deception 325, Negotiation 315, Literacy 275, Intimidation 370, Spell Identification 220, Use Magic Device 180, Listen 245, Detect 275, Search 190, Observation 300. Characteristics. Damage reduction 15, Night Vision 60 feet, Flame body, Immunity to electric, flame and poison, acid and cold resistance 10, Magic resistance 30, Telepathy 100 feet, True knowledge abilities. Burning explosion, Eyes of fear, Spirit of fear, Body of flames, Whip of flames, Bind, Demon claws, +1 natural magic weapon. Demon skin, damage reduction +10. Demon resistance, all resistances +10. Abilities, proficient in dual wielding, proficient in preemptive attacks, multiple attacks, weapon mastery, beheading sword, proficient in violent attacks. Spell-like abilities, soul manipulation, telekinesis, blasphemy, greater teleportation, fear, cast at will, fireball, 7 times a day instant cast, dominate demon, once a day, summon demon army, telepathy. As a demon lord, Baelor was promoted. Sauron's strength was stronger than other Baelors. Even his average attributes were about 2 points higher. He was now walking the path of a Baelor demon lord. In the future he would definitely need to evolve into a leader. From the beginning to the promotion, the strength of his demon incarnation had surpassed most of the demigods. Soren was now cultivating a permanent incarnation that was above the level of a demigod. In the future it might even reach the level of a weak god. Chapter 926. Soren entered the gathering place of the Fermi Ants. It was an independent gear with an area about twice the size of Motor City. There were a lot of Fermi ants gathered there, probably about 30 to 50,000 of them. The gravity of this gear seemed to be independent. After arriving at the gear he could clearly feel the increase in gravity, which was about 1.5 times that of the material plane. The area of the floating city was very large. As soon as Soren arrived at the gear, he saw the broken outline. However, this floating city had been transformed into a nest by the Fermi ants, so he didn't know how much was left. He tried to get closer by hiding in the shadows, but when he approached the central hall of the ant tribe, he attracted the attention of some large female ants. Psionic sensing. These slightly plump ants were the Empress's guards. It was possible for a god in the form of a saint to be exhausted to death by human wave tactics. Soren observed the surroundings, left a space waymark, and left. There were too many Fermi ants, and their racial characteristics were a bit like a swarm of bees. If they attacked a single Fermi worker or Fermi warrior, there would be no problem. However, once someone attacked the queen of the Fermi ants, all the Fermi ants under her control would rush over to support. In other words, attacking the queen of the Fermi ants was like poking a hornet's nest. Tens of thousands of Fermi ants would immediately chase after you. Under normal circumstances, adventurers would never provoke the queen of the Fermi ants because the price to pay was too high. Soren left the gear through a green portal. He entered the shadows and wandered around. He discovered a gathering place of Huna demons, some wandering astral world hunters, and traces of a group of lustful demons. There were many demons in the mechanical realm. Lustful demons didn't look much different from succubus, but succubus had demon wings while lustful demons mostly had fallen angel wings. Unless they were mixed-blood lustful demons, their wings were more feathered. Soren didn't like dealing with demons because they wouldn't do anything without enough benefits. Even if they did, they would have all kinds of evil thoughts. He was just going to see if there would be any trouble nearby. If there was no problem, he was going to mobilize the power of the Thaling rune and the golem army of Moder to deal with the fomites. However, this attack was almost equivalent to a head-on war. Therefore it would take some time to prepare. The military of Mordor City must follow the order, and at the same time, the interplanar astral teleportation also needed to be tested. They couldn't be careless in other planes. Otherwise, the golem army that Mordor City had painstakingly accumulated might be completely wiped out. Mordor City. In the blink of an eye, it was early June. In the fields outside Mordor City, there was a golden wheat wave that spread for more than 10 miles. It looked like a golden ocean. The heavy and plump ears of wheat looked so delightful. The joy of the harvest was everywhere in Mordor City. Winter wheat was planted in Mordor City. It was generally sown from mid to late September to early October last year, and ripened from the end of May to mid to late June the next year. In Soren's plan, the farming of Mordor City was closer to the farm economy and manor economy. The initial land reclamation was done by the clay golems, and then they dug ditches to irrigate the farmland, fertilize and clean it up with precision farming. The witches had even cast the stone to mud spell during the initial stages of land reclamation. In a world without magic, the harvest in the first year of reclamation would not be much. But in a world with magic and gods, everything became possible. Mordor City ushered in a bumper harvest. From the establishment of Mordor City to the present, Soren had always needed food from the south coast and other places. But this year's bumper harvest directly offset the dependence of Mordor City on food from the outside world. At present, the harvest of food had not been completed, so it was impossible to calculate how much this year's harvest was. However, according to the statistics of Mordor City City Hall officials, the food harvested in Mordor City this year should be enough for 300,000 people to eat for more than 2 years. The City Hall was now preparing to build a granary. In this era, the importance of food was extremely high. If a city did not have more than 10 years' worth of food, it would not be rich at all. This was only the basis of the second batch of land reclamation. Judging from the situation of the fourth and fifth batches of land reclamation, Mordor City would have no problem supporting millions of people in the future. The entire city of Mordor was busy. Whether it was the citizens of Mordor City or the newly freed serfs, they were harvesting food in the fields almost every day. This kind of harvest could be laughed even if it was hard and tiring. However, in just a day or two, the cement road originally built in Mordor City was full of harvested food. Because the grain output was higher than expected, and the weather in the outer islands changed faster, if they did not dry it as soon as possible, it would be very troublesome when it rained. In the end, the city hall had to order not to dry the food on the main roads of Mordor City. The messenger of the goddess of agriculture arrived soon. Because Soren was not in Mordor City, the high priest was in charge of receiving him this time. Obviously, the goddess of agriculture was very well informed. However, Mordor City had such a big harvest this year. Many people were praying to the goddess of agriculture during the harvest, so it was normal for her to know about it first. 1 year of farming was enough to supply more than 2 years of food. This was obviously what the goddess of agriculture was pursuing. If it could be popularized, what she had always wanted to do might be possible. The messengers of the goddess of agriculture came with goodwill. They hoped to build some shrines and temples in the city of Mordor. The goddess of agriculture would send priests and druids to guard the city. These people would guide the farmers in farming and teach them how to deal with some natural disasters. Sometimes it was not enough to rely on the protection of the realm of the gods. Motor City had a big harvest this year on the one hand because Soren's realm changed the climate. The magic lock of Motor City made the environment more suitable for farming. At the same time, there was also the fertilizer made by Saruman. However, agricultural farming would also have other problems. The droll and priests of the goddess of agriculture were masters in this area. They could know that farmers should cultivate more rationally and meticulously. There was no way for the high priest to decide this kind of thing. She quickly connected with Soren through her mind, and then gave the messenger of the goddess of agriculture a reply after Soren agreed. The granary was set up in the south of Motor City. This year's food was definitely not enough to finish. The city hall of Motor City now had nearly 1 million kindlers' generous finances. The income from selling food was not enough. Therefore, under the arrangement of the city hall, the golems, workers, and witches were working together to build a large granary. The planned budget given to Gloria by the city hall was a large granary that was enough for the 1 million people of Motor City to eat for 20 years. It was difficult for such a granary to be built by ordinary people. It must be built with the help of witches and magic. Therefore, after Gloria signed, she immediately deployed more than a dozen witches to help. It was easiest to store food for more than 10 years with the help of magic, because the spellcaster's library could be stored for hundreds of years without any problems. With food in hand, there was no need to panic. After the city hall had enough food, they also began to move people from the south coast. According to their estimate, after the third batch of land was reclaimed, the population of Motor City could directly expand to about 500,000. This could not only bring enough believers to the Lord, but also greatly increase the working population of Motor City. The population ratio of Motor City had always been unbalanced. In a city with a total population of less than 200,000, the number of troops accounted for nearly one-third of it. If the many fleets on the south coast were included, the total population of Motor City was less than 300,000, and the army was nearly 120,000. The city hall should balance this population ratio and add enough civilians to Motor City. The southern continent was now in constant war, and the civilian class was displaced. The Principality of Rossard had recently set off civil strife. Mrs. Duke of Red Dragon's rule over the Principality of Rossard had been shaken by the Church of Glory's announcement that she had colluded with the devil. Some great nobles had openly opposed her with the support of other forces. There was no guilt in poaching the enemy's people. The city hall of Motor City was going to attract a group of refugees from the south of the Principality of Rossard to move to the towns around Motor City to cultivate the land. Population was wealth. What Motor City had to do now was to take advantage of the outbreak of the Avatar crisis to plunder people from other places. When the population met the needs, Motor City could further expand its colonization. Motor City was not the only island suitable for survival in the outer islands. A city could be built on Treasure Island, and other islands could also be colonized. But the premise of all this was that there needed to be enough population. This was the same as the expansion plan of the temple, because all faith came from the population. The faith provided by 200,000 people was completely different from the faith provided by 1 million people. This huge gap in quantity was enough to affect the weight of the entire temple. According to the high priest's estimation, if Soren wanted to reach and maintain the standard of a great divine power, then he must have more than 1 million believers, and only this number could ensure that his divine power would not decline after he was promoted to a great divine power. Of course, the degree of faith could make up for the number, but the number of devout believers and fanatics was only a small number, so when considering, he could only use pan-believers as the standard. Because at that time, even if there were more fanatics, they would only provide more power. Fanatics and devout believers would die one day. When they died, the new believers might become pan-believers. At that time, if the number did not meet the standard, then it would still enter a period of decline. There was once a god who relied on 200,000 or 300,000 believers to promote to a great divine power. But with the death of these fanatics in less than 100 years, he who still had 200,000 or 300,000 believers, directly declined to a mid-level divine power. At that time, many new believers did not meet the standard of devout belief at all. The quality would decline over time, but the number might increase. Chapter 927. Cargo ships docked at the port of Mordor. There were teams of heavily armed soldiers guarding nearby, and the onlookers could not help but stay far away. 5 men dressed as clerks were counting with pens and paper, and there were many attendants and doctors who were responsible for checking the epidemic. Further away there was a temporary bathhouse. There were men on the left and women on the right. At this moment, a fire had been set up to sweep the hot water. In the distance, a witch in a robe sat on a chair and looked at all this. It's almost done. A man dressed as a city hall official looked at the time and said to the attendant in front of him, "Let the people on the ship come down. Send them down in batches, don't panic." The attendant took the order and left. Very quickly, a few people in ragged clothes and emaciated faces were sent down from the first cargo ship. These people were all refugees, but they all had one thing in common, that was, they rarely acted alone. Most of them had families, and some of them had large families of 5 people. These were all refugees who had migrated from Mordor City. In order to avoid trouble and better manage, Mordor City prioritized refugees who had families. They were easier to manage than other refugees, and it was easier for them to take root in the land of Mordor City. The first batch of refugees had more than 300 people. These refugees lined up to register at the open-air shed at the dock. The 5 clerks quickly registered their names and families, and then distributed them to others. The long-term state of wandering made these refugees a little timid, but at the same time, they also looked at everything in Mordor City curiously, as if to observe whether the city was as rich as the outside world said. "Come here. Men stand here, women stand here. Put all the clothes in the basket next to you. Take them away together later." On the left was a burly man and on the right was a woman with a huge waist. They had the unique pride and superiority of the citizens of Mordor City. They shouted at the refugees in front of them, "You can't bring in the things outside. It's easy to get infected with dirty diseases. Go in and take a bath with hot water to disinfect, and then go to the back door to get new clothes." The refugees who had just arrived were a little confused, but when they heard that their clothes would be burned after taking off, they were still a little reluctant, but they were soon pushed in. The whole process of bathing was very fast because there were still many people following. There were also people at the bathing area. They held a tube-like thing and sprayed hot water at them. There was also something about disinfectant. They didn't know anything about it at all. They were like puppets at the mercy of others. The first batch of people were sent to the back door after they finished bathing. Each person was given 2 sets of clothes made of coarse cloth. They were all brand new. The size might not be suitable, but they could still be worn. If there were any problems, they could take them back and ask their wives to change them. The queue continued to move forward. After bathing, the refugees arrived near a large shed. In front of them were several large pots filled with thick oatmeal. Each person was given a large bowl of oatmeal and a piece of dried fish. After eating, they were led to the other side of the dock. The sound of porridge slurping could be heard all around. Some of the refugees who had finished eating looked around curiously. Then they saw someone take the basket containing their original clothes and throw it directly to the side of the garbage dump to burn it. "Those who are full, come over. Bring me the number plates that were given to you at the beginning. Those who are in odd numbers will follow me later, and those who are in even numbers will follow her." A man who looked like a clerk appeared, looked at them and said with a condescending look, "Don't fall behind on the road and don't talk too much. Follow her for about an hour. Then someone will arrange your accommodation." More than 300 refugees were divided into 2 groups. One group went to the south and the other went to the north. These refugees were much more energetic after changing their clothes and eating. They looked at the buildings of the city of Mordor curiously. When passing by the temple, they couldn't help but lower their heads. Out of the port of Mordor there was a flat road. They had never seen such a road. It was clean, neat and solid. They didn't know what it was built with. Because it was the season of winter wheat harvest, there were many grains being dried on both sides of the road. The yellow grains were spread all over the road, which made many refugees widen their eyes. Since the Avatar crisis, they hadn't seen so much food. If it was on the south coast, many people would fight for it. But now it was piled up on both sides of the road, and they couldn't even see anyone sneaking away. Occasionally the citizens of Mordor passed by, but they completely turned a blind eye to the wealth on the ground. If this was placed in other places, it was estimated that all the food would be taken away in a while. Port of Mordor. The refugees from the first ship were brought down, and soon the people from the second ship were also brought down. The same process continued. They were busy until the evening when these clerks had time to gather together. Then they handed a document to the witch next to them and said, "Lady Lena, there are a total of 3,720 refugees in this batch. They will be settled in a nearby town next. Please give this document to Lady Gloria to sign. The witch nodded indifferently, took the document, and left directly. These spellcasters didn't intervene in the city hall of Mordor, but they had some daily tasks to do every week, either teaching in the academy or completing alchemy work. What they cared about most was called contribution points, because this thing could allow them to enter the highest level of the Mordor Grand Library. Everything was going on in an orderly manner. These people had adapted to the changes brought by Soren. Now many things only needed to be instructed, and the city hall could come up with detailed regulations by itself. Mechanical Realm. Soren passed through a long and narrow mechanical corridor, and then a huge mechanical workshop appeared in front of him. There were many such mechanical workshops in the mechanical realm. Their role was to construct life. High-grade alchemy construct life had been maintaining the normal operation of the mechanical realm. They would repair this huge clock. Thaling I, who was given freedom by Soren, was here. As a high-level alchemy construct life, it was easy for it to get a high position in the mechanical realm. And with the knowledge they had, it was not difficult for a few Thaling to join forces in the mechanical realm. Through the corridor there was a row of steel golems. It seemed that they had transformed this place into a golem factory. There were many dangerous creatures in the mechanical realm. The hunters of the astral wanderers would also attack high-level construct life. At the same time, they also had to guard against the ubiquitous Fermi ants. Therefore it was inevitable for Thaling to build their own guards. Nice to meet you. Great Sir Soren. Thaling III was in charge of greeting Soren. It bowed slightly to Soren and then led him into a tower. This was a newly built tower, located at the most important part of the gear. There were 3 workshops nearby. One was for producing golems, one was for providing energy, and the last one's function was unknown. After Soren walked in, all the Thaling were there. Thaling I bowed slightly to Soren and then said, "Sir Soren, what can I do for you?" There was no need to beat around the bush when dealing with Thaling because construct life were very straightforward. Soren did not hesitate and said, "Yes. I'm interested in the floating city that fell in the Fermi Ant City. So I hope you can help me occupy this city." Thaling I waved its hand, and a magic image appeared in front of its eyes. It pointed to one of the cities and said, "Is it here?" Soren nodded. Thaling I pondered for a moment and said, "Sir Soren, although we have established our own territory in the mechanical realm, with our current strength, I'm afraid it's difficult to occupy this city." Soren replied, "I know. So I'll send troops from Motor City. But I need you to help stabilize the portal and provide some military support." Thaling I was a little surprised when it heard this. It said, "Cross-plane space combat? I didn't expect you to develop so fast." "There's no problem. I'll provide a stable portal in the mechanical realm." At the same time, when attacking the Fermi Ant City, we'll provide 3,000 clay golems, 1,000 stone golems, and 200 steel golems as support. The assistance provided by Thaling I surprised Soren. Because the other party had provided too many troops, it was likely that they had spent most of their energy on making steel golems. As if it guessed Soren's thoughts, Thaling I explained, "This gear was originally the gathering place of the Fermi ants. In order to occupy this place we paid a little price. So the current task is to operate the golem factory at full power. There are enough disassembled materials in the mechanical realm, and there are many things left behind by the golems. In order to deal with the expansion of the Fermi ants, we have been operating the golem factory at full power." Indeed, the speed of the Fermi ants' expansion was annoying. With the military support from Thaling golems, it was much easier to attack a Fermi ant city with tens of thousands of people. What Soren had to do next was to contact Motor City and see how many troops they could mobilize. Ordinary troops were useless here. Because of the different characteristics of the plane, ordinary troops still needed time to adapt. What could be mobilized was the golem army. Before Soren left, there were nearly 6,000 clay golems stored in Motor City. There were about 2,000 or 3,000 stone golems, and there were fewer steel golems, only about 300 or 500. There were a total of 20 diamond golems and improved golems. This time, the mechanical realm was a war of attrition, and the clay golems would definitely be used as cannon fodder. Soren estimated that he would not be able to take them down without mobilizing more than half of the troops. Chapter 928. Ha! What's going on today? Why aren't these crystal lights lit up? Roland tilted her head and looked not far away. She was a young and energetic half-elf. She usually slept until 10 o'clock in the evening, and the crystal lights in Mordor City were usually turned off at 10 o'clock. Sometimes she stared at these crystal lights at night, or chatted with another little girl downstairs. The chandeliers were turned off very early today. They were all turned off around 8 o'clock. This had never happened before. However, other than the lighthouse at the port, there was no light anywhere else. The little girl had a feeling that something was going to happen tonight. The little girl tiptoed down the balcony to take a look, but as soon as she landed, she found that her father was looking at her with a smile on his face. Oh no. Roland forgot that her father used to be a very powerful thief. Although he changed to a proper job after moving to Mordor City, she never succeeded in sneaking out of the house in the middle of the night. What are you doing? Her father was rarely angry, but Roland still lowered her head in fear. She quickly said, "The crystal lights are not on today, it's so boring. I want to take a walk in the square." Pa, her father patted her on the head and said, "Come back with me. There's something very important in the city hall today, and all the crystal lights are turned off. It's also forbidden to approach the central square." After saying that, he grabbed her back as if she was a little chick. Mordor City, Central Square. Usually, there would still be people moving around the square at night. Occasionally, one could see shy boys and girls secretly holding hands and flirting. However, there was no one to be seen today because there were groups of soldiers patrolling nearby. High Priest. An officer-like man walked to the front of the temple and bowed. Her Excellency Gloria said that she is ready. The High Priest's expression was very calm. He nodded and said, "I see. Send someone to cut off the energy transmission of the lighthouse, and then concentrate the energy of the elemental furnace to the portal." Ziz. A faint arc appeared, which was a phenomenon caused by a high concentration of magic energy. The lighthouse in the port of Mordor in the distance flickered a few times and then went out. Then the crystal in the central square suddenly became bright, and all the crystal pipes appeared with a lavender light, directly connecting to the laboratory. A cold mechanical voice sounded. Mana transfer commencing. Lock onto the teleportation beacon of the astral boundary. Interplanar teleportation plan activated. Begin the test. A clay golem was activated by the energy and walked out of the golem factory with heavy steps, disappearing into the white light of the portal. Thaling voice rang out again. Transmission complete. Testing the teleportation beacons. The teleportation deviation was over 20 kilometers. Recalibrate the teleportation beacon. Gloria's silhouette was busy on the side, and the Fallen which was also adjusting a huge pile of alchemy runes near the portal. After more than 10 minutes, the second test began again. Soon, the second clay golem disappeared from the portal. Thaling mechanical voice sounded. Transmission complete. Testing the teleportation beacons. The teleportation deviation was about 10 meters. The test was complete. Lock onto the space waymark. Activate Magic Golem Army teleportation. It was easy for errors to occur during interplanar teleportation. Even legendary mages were prone to accidents. The premise was to provide 2 teleportation beacons so that even if there was a deviation, it could be corrected. With the current technology of Mordor, the deviation of the teleportation position could be controlled within 30 meters. Gloria also stood up at this time, and she said to Fallen which beside her, "Mother, you can start the transmission. Let me go this time, okay?" Fallen which raised her head and said, "You have to stay in Mordor. Those officials respect and obey you very much. So let me go to the mechanical realm this time." Okay. There's nothing to fight about. Start the transmission of the Golem army. As the tower genie operated, a huge secret door appeared under the Golem factory. Then activated clay golems walked out one after another. Mordor City had been operating the Golem factory at full strength for a long time. A small part of the golems were used for construction, and the other part was kept in the warehouse as an army. Clay golems were the easiest golem to make. Soren brought out more than 1,000 of them from the desert ruins, and Mordor City produced thousands of them themselves. This reserve was to deal with the attack of the Devil Legion. However, this wave of attack did not choose to attack Mordor City, so these golem legions could be transferred to other places. More than 3,000 clay golems lined up neatly and entered the portal, followed by hundreds of stone golems. These 2 types of golems were the most common. The steel golems had to wait for the metal or from the bottomless abyss to be refined. On the other side, near the construction factory in the mechanical realm, a simple portal was also completed. A clay golem first appeared in front of Soren, and then after 10 minutes, more clay golems began to walk out of the portal. The mobility is still not enough. The alchemy tree in Mordor City still needs to be climbed up. Soren looked at the clay golems in front of him and frowned slightly. although cross-plane teleportation is already possible. But the mobility of this teleportation method is still too poor. The Arcane Empire could perform zero-delay teleportation on the battlefield. The God Slayers who attacked the Queen of Spiders could also perform zero-delay battlefield airdrop. The teleportation technology of Mordor City must be further improved. Sauron's ideal cross-plane battle was to directly airdrop the Golem army into the city of the Fermi Ants. But at present there were not enough alchemy trees in Mordor City, so they could only teleport to the mechanical realm first and then gather the troops to attack. In this way the mobility would be reduced a lot. When the Arcane Empire dared to intervene in the Abyss Blood War to compete for resources from the demons, they relied on this zero-delay teleportation technology. The research of the portal was one thing and the energy supply was another. In order to activate the cross-plane portal, Mordor City even turned off the energy supply to the lighthouse. Thousands of clay golems were assembled, and then the golems began to assemble. The figures of Thaling 1 and Thaling 5 appeared, and they bowed slightly to Sauron and said, "Lord Shadow, our golem army has been assembled." On the other side, near the golem factory, 3 squares of different sizes had been formed. Because the command system of the golems was different, the forces of Thaling could only be controlled by them. These golems were also very interested in the fallen floating city of the Arcane Empire. They hoped to do some research after defeating the Fermi Ants. A large number of forces were gathered together. In the end, Mordor City sent out more than 3,000 clay models, more than 800 stone golems, more than 100 steel golems and 12 diamond golems. The time of attack was chosen to be night. The reason was that the golem army itself was not made of flesh and blood. Night had little impact on them and they had a clear advantage in battle. As the figure of the fallen which appeared from the portal, the army of Mordor City had all arrived. Thaling 3 activated a portal on the edge of the gear, which could directly lead to the city occupied by the Fermi Ants. "Let's start." Sauron nodded and handed over the command of the golem army to the fallen witch, and then transferred his mind to the bottomless abyss. This time the battle was against tens of thousands of Fermi Ants. All creatures of this race were at the standard of professionals. Even the workers of the Fermi Ants were equivalent to level 3 to 5 fighters. The challenge level of the mechanical realm was so high, largely because of these ubiquitous Fermi Ants. Sauron also needed a reserve force. At this time he needed to use the power of the demon incarnation, and if necessary he might even have to airdrop a demon army to the battlefield. The mighty golem army began to move. Such a large-scale operation could not be hidden from the enemy, so when the golem army teleported near the city of the ants, they had already been discovered by the enemy. Zzz. Accompanied by sounds similar to the insects, a large number of Fermi ants gathered. This race was the standard characteristic of the insects. Their individual consciousness was very weak. The strongest will of the entire race was the Ant Queen. The other Fermi ants were infinitely close to puppets, and could be controlled by the Queen's mind at any time. Heavy footsteps sounded. The clay golems as cannon fodder began to advance. The golem army did not have much skill in the battle. It was a violent and beautiful picture. One by one the clay golems, which were about 2 meters tall and weighed more than 500 pounds, directly hit the defense line of the Fermi ants with brute force. Even if they died, they did not have the slightest reaction. They just listened to the order and kept moving forward. Along the way the corpses of the Fermi ants were crushed. While the enemy army was constantly being destroyed, the number of clay golems was gradually increasing. An insect race with all professionals was not easy to deal with. However, as time passed, a little difference began to appear. That was, the clay golems of Mordor City suffered fewer casualties, while 1/3 of the clay golems of Thaling had been killed. The reason for all this was very simple. It was because the golems of Mordor City were inputted with a special ability when they were being made. Combine defense with offense. After nearly 2 months, Gloria finally cracked a special ability that was inputted into the golems during the Arcane Empire. Chapter 929. If a golem was compared to a robot with low intelligence, then, attack and defense, was a combat program that was inputted into its body. Alice, the legendary puppeteer from the East, had the greatest credit for cracking this ability, because it was she who completed the core analysis of the golem command. This command could be mass-produced. With the application of soul crystals, basically all the golem puppets in Mordor City had the ability to defend and attack as soon as they left the factory. The additional combat effect of this ability was very obvious because under the attack of the Fermi ants, the loss of the clay golems in Motor City was reduced by nearly half. Golems advance. Soren seized the moment when the clay golems broke through the enemy's direction and ordered the more advanced golems to advance. The intelligence of the Fermi ants was only 6 points, which meant that they were similar to a beast. They completely obeyed the orders of the Ant Queen and were almost unafraid of death on the battlefield. Any battle with the Zergs would be a war of attrition. Soren had almost expected this. Otherwise, in the deepest part of the abyss, there would not be so many demons driven to the upper level by the Zergs. In the space below the 450th floor of the abyss, there were many small planes that were occupied by the Zergs. This was something that even the demon Orbis couldn't do anything about. Because there were too many Zergs and the demon army didn't have much of an advantage against them. As long as the Zergs had resources, they would have endless cannon fodder to consume. Just like the city of the Fermi ants, as long as they were given a month or two, there would be an endless stream of troops inside the city. The golems were like a sharp blade that pierced into the army of the Fermi ants. At this time, behind the city of the Fermi ants, some Fermi soldiers with bigger and stronger shells appeared. At the same time, there were also Fermi ants with psionic spellcasting abilities. They were blessing the other Fermi ants with defensive spells, and at the same time forming a third line of defense. Lord Shadow. Thaling III's figure appeared beside Soren and bowed slightly. There are too many enemies. If this continues, I'm afraid it will alert the other Fermi ant cities. The Ant Queen here might ask for help from the other Ant Queens. It may even alarm the mother of ants further away. This was indeed a problem. Soren could not help but frown. Although the casualties of the Fermi ants in front of him were already in the thousands. However, the other party showed no signs of retreating at all. Behind them was the mighty army of the ant race. This city had a total of 30 to 50,000 ants, but there were at least 30,000 of them gathered here. They were not ordinary soldiers and seemed to have no fear at all. No matter how serious the casualties were, they would not retreat a single step. Even at the moment of death, they would bite off a piece of the clay golem. If they continued to fight like this, in the end, it would be a pure battle of strength. Even if Mordor could win, they would have to pay a high price. Soren didn't want to see the battle turn out like this. Meteor burst. As if it couldn't bear the losses from the battle, Thaling No. 1 began to prepare a legendary spell. In this case, ordinary level 9 spells were not very useful. At most, they could only kill 1 or 200 Fermi ants, which was insignificant to the scale of tens of thousands of Fermi ants. At present, the only legendary spell that could clear the field was Meteorite, but Meteorite did not distinguish between friend and foe. With one meteorite, all the golems would be destroyed. As the Fermi ants entered the battlefield, the loss of golems gradually increased. Hundreds of clay golems had been destroyed in Mordor, and other golems were also seriously injured. Although the steel golems could form a suppressive force, the queen of the Fermi ants had not appeared yet. It was still too early to send in the main force. Fallen Witch's figure appeared beside Soren. She frowned at the stalemate in front of her and whispered, "The enemy's formation is very dense. I think we can try to mobilize the super mana pulse cannon to fire." The Fermi ants inherited the nature of ants. Those who had seen a large group of ants in action knew that this kind of creature liked to gather in a dense group. Many golems were surrounded by them and dismantled by them. However, such a dense formation was also very easy to become the target of spells and other large-scale attacks. The lethality of spells was limited because the resistance of creatures in the mechanical realm was relatively high. However, if it was replaced by the super mana pulse cannon at the top of the arcane tower, the effect would be very terrifying. Solen's heart skipped a beat and he asked, "Can it be done?" Fallen Witch immediately replied, "It should be possible to try. But you need to use divine power to stabilize the portal." Saint form. Soren directly answered with action. He entered the saint form in an instant, and the golden light shrouded his figure. With the convergence of divine power, Soren's figure emerged in midair, and then he pointed to the sky. Space change, shard of divinity. Plane teleportation, shard of divinity. Soren directly used divine power to change the laws of space in the mechanical realm. Only gods with lesser divine power could temporarily change the laws. This was something that even legendary wizards could not do. A portal was opened. The other side was connected to the arcane tower in the city of Mordor. Gloria was now on standby at the top of the arcane tower. With the guidance of the high priest, The mana pulse cannon at the top of the arcane tower was aimed at a stable portal that appeared directly in front of them. The mana pulse cannon is charging. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Charging complete. Target locked. Fire. A dazzling light shot out. The energy cannon shot directly into the portal, and then the next moment, it appeared inside the mechanical realm through the portal. Soren had only seen this tactic last time when the Godslayer dealt with the Queen of Spiders. This was the first time he used it. Boom. The dazzling and blazing light beam directly turned the 5 clay golems into dust. Then it crushed all the Fermi ants in its path and vaporized them. In the blink of an eye, a 15-meter-wide, 3-kilometer-long vacuum zone appeared in front of the battlefield. All the Fermi ants behind it, whether they were workers, soldiers, or guards, were vaporized. The final energy of the super arcane crystal pulse cannon bombarded a beehive-shaped building. After leaving a huge hole, the entire building collapsed. The battlefield was dead silent. This cannon directly killed thousands of Fermi ants and instantly divided the enemy into 2 parts, and the center was a dead zone without any life. At this moment, even Soren was a little shocked, because the attack of the mana pulse cannon was too terrifying. He felt that in his non-divine state, he was afraid that even with the divine shield, he could only withstand 1 or 2 attacks at most. No wonder the spellcasters during the Arcane Empire dared to challenge the gods. The steel golems and diamond golems can advance. The power of this cannon seemed to have caused the fearless Fermi ants to panic, and it was more likely that the ant queen who controlled them felt fear. As the diamond golems stepped into the battlefield, the situation immediately became clear. The diamond golem had a damage reduction of 80%, so the Fermi ants could only deal a limited amount of damage to it. It was completely unhindered, and the attacks of more than 10 Fermi ants could only scratch the surface of the diamond golem. Buzz buzz buzz. Just when Soren thought that the battle was over, a strange vibration suddenly came from the back of the Fermi ant city. Then a black shadow appeared in the distant sky, and at this moment, it was flying towards Soren's location at high speed. Upon closer inspection, it was a large group of Fermi ants, but they were different from the other ants. These Fermi ants had a pair of wings on their back. There's actually a flying troop? Soren's expression was a little surprised. It seemed that his attack made the Ant Queen feel a deep sense of crisis. The target of these flying ants was obviously Soren, and it seemed that they were going to carry out a decapitation operation. Hundreds of flying ants quickly approached. However, Soren did not even have the thought of retreating because he was the most powerful one on the whole battlefield. It was simply a dream for the Ant Queen to decapitate him. Elemental Legion. Demon Incarnation. With the opening of a portal, an Elder Wind Elemental appeared, followed by a giant Fire Elemental, and finally a Fire Elemental Elder. At the same time, the surrounding temperature rose sharply, and a raging fire suddenly appeared on the ground. Then a demon more than 3 meters tall appeared, holding a giant beheading sword in one hand and a flame whip in the other. As soon as it appeared, it roared, "Die!" Insects. Large fireballs flew out one after another. Then this powerful Baler flew into the air. Its broad demonic wings were covered with raging fire. It did not need any skills at all. It directly turned into a large fireball and rushed into the dense flying ants. With a swing of the beheading sword, the Ant Queen was split in half. The flame whip rolled and several flying ants fell. The demon Sauron's attack did not care about any rules at all. It was the most brutal way of fighting. He relied on his Baler form to bully these winged ants. Plop, plop, plop. Sauron with his demonic wings was simply the overlord of the sky. Perhaps only dragons were qualified to fight with him in the sky. As for these winged Fermi ants, no matter how many there were, they were just a group of insects. Before they even got close to Sauron, their bodies had already begun to burn. Many ants who desperately rushed to the side of the demon incarnation had only attacked once before they were completely roasted and fell from the sky. This was not a battle at all. P.S. In between writing, I played an online game called The Undefeated Legend, and got a Durex. He said that he would send it to me in 2 days. Chapter 930. Fire Baler? Not only Thaling No. 1 was surprised by the sudden appearance of the demon incarnation, but even the Fallen Witch was surprised. However, she quickly thought of something and murmured, "No wonder the ores provided by Motor City contained a lot of materials from the abyss. So you've already reached out to the lower planes?" There were diamond golems below and fire balers above. The defense line of the Fermi ants finally collapsed completely. All that was left was a futile resistance. They were using their lives to stop the advance of the golems. What do you want, outsider? Why do you have to kill us all? Just when Soren thought that victory was in sight and that he would soon be able to conquer the beehive city of the Fermi ants, a telepathic message connected to him. At the same time, a gentle but slightly panicked female voice was heard. My people didn't attack you. They're just acting according to their nature. Can't you let us live? At this point, the voice was full of pleading. Then, the Fermi ants in front of him scattered in all directions. Finally, a huge ant queen appeared under the protection of a group of guards. Ordinary Fermi ants only weighed 60 pounds, while Fermi soldiers weighed 160 pounds, which was the same as an adult man. However, the guards in front of him weighed at least 1,500 pounds. Their bodies looked like alien creatures and they could spit corrosive poison attacks. In a head-on battle with the golems, they weren't at a disadvantage at all. As for the queen of the Fermi ants, her strength was quite astonishing. She retained the characteristics of the ruler of the Zerg. Her innate strength, dexterity, intelligence, wisdom and charm were all above 20 points. She was a typical supernatural magical creature when she was born. A queen of the Fermi ants could easily have a level of psionic power that was not weaker than a legendary spellcaster. Unlike the other queen of the Fermi ants, the one in front of Soren seemed to have the ability to move on her own. However, the Fermi ants in front of him were too fat and lost the ability to move. They even needed the support of the colony to eat. The queen of the Fermi ants in front of him was close to 10 feet long and 4 feet tall. She weighed about 3,500 pounds. The characteristic of the Fermi ants was collective consciousness. The ant queen relied on this to control the development of the entire race. Although there seemed to be a large number of Fermi ants, they were scattered into individual consciousnesses. There were only a few Emperor-level Fermi ants in the entire machinery realm who had independent thoughts. The ant queens lacked the ability to move, but they could easily cast spells that were around the ninth circle. Their spellcasting abilities were equivalent to warlocks, and they also had psionic characteristics. The queen of the Fermi ants had a very powerful telepathic ability. They could communicate telepathically with any intelligent creature within 50 kilometers. Soren wasn't the only one who received the ant queen's message. The others must have received the message as well, because the Fallen which turned around to ask for Soren's opinion. The situation of the battle was already very clear. Eliminating these Fermi ants would at most increase the casualties. If this kind of loss was needed, Mordor City could afford it. Floating City. Soren's figure flew to the front of the battle line and looked down at the ant queen in front of him. After pondering for a moment, he said, I need everything in the floating city that fell in your city. The Fermi ant queen stared at Soren and immediately said, No problem. Your Excellency. I can feel your greatness. I'm willing to give you everything in the floating city, but I beg you to let us live. Soren shook his head and slowly said, The floating city is just a trophy we need. According to the law of the astral plane, you are now my prisoner, so you have to pay a price if you want to regain your freedom. Hearing Soren's words, the Fermi ant queen's voice suddenly became a little uneasy. What price? Soren raised his fingertips, and with a trace of divine light, a point of divinity condensed into a golden light on his palm. He sent the golden light to the ant queen and slowly said, Accept it. I give you freedom. At the same time in the future, it will help you become the mother of all ants and the real ant queen. The light of divinity was so tempting. At this moment, the ant queen finally knew Soren's identity. She felt fear but also full of desire because a little divinity was so precious to mortals. She struggled to resist the temptation of divinity, because she understood one thing very well. If she accepted this divinity, then from now on she would be completely under Soren's control. But she had no choice now. In the end, the Fermi ant queen bowed her head and accepted the golden divinity. The moment the divinity entered her body, it began to transform her. Her body was shrouded in a faint golden light, and the shell on her body became brighter, as if something had changed from its essence. Heal serious wounds. A divine spell was suddenly cast from the ant queen's body. Soren's divinity gave her some of the abilities of a priest. As the divinity was integrated into her body, the connection between Soren and her became closer. As long as Soren wanted to, he could control her mind at any time. It was not shameful to submit to a god, even a god more powerful than the mother of all ants. My lord, great Shadow Lord, please come with me. What you want is inside. The moment she accepted the divinity, the Fermi Ant Queen knew Soren's identity. She humbly bowed her head to Soren, and then led Soren into the ant nest. The fallen witch's expression was a little hesitant, but after Soren nodded, she followed. Soren's brand of divinity had absolute control over the Ant Queen. In this case there was no way for any accidents to happen. Thaling 1 and Thaling 3 also followed. They were very curious about what else was preserved in the floating city. 4 high-level constructs. The civilization of the arcane empire that created them was full of countless secrets. This is the furnace of elemental fission. The fallen witch was pleasantly surprised after entering the core palace of the ants. Because of the huge energy radiation, the center of the ant palace was the well-preserved energy center of the floating city, which was the elemental fission device that operated the floating city. It was still operating and did not explode, but some parts could no longer be activated. My lord, there are still some things scattered around the city. I'll send someone to bring them over right away. The Ant Queen respectfully stayed in front of Soren, looking like a tamed pet. Many ant workers seemed to have forgotten the battle just now, and immediately moved all kinds of things inside the ant palace. At the same time, there were also a lot of metal, jewelry, and unknown items. My lord, these are your servants' offerings to you. The Ant Queen's expression was a little flattering. She humbly lowered her head and said, "They are not of much use to me. However, they should be able to help my lord's church grow." The intelligence of the entire ant race was added to the Ant Queen. Soren looked at her, raised his hand, and put another point of divinity on her. He nodded and said, "Very good. Since you are so thoughtful, I will not be stingy with my rewards. What you need to do next is to strengthen your race as much as possible. When your race is strong enough to challenge the mother of ants, I will help you to take her divinity." The Ant Queen was ecstatic when she heard this. On this side, Soren was communicating with the Ant Queen, but on the other side, the fallen witches and tower spirits were all immersed in the study of new things. Thaling was also a technical maniac. At the moment they were looking at the well-preserved parts everywhere. At the same time, the fallen witch and Thaling No. 1 were each holding a record and counting the degree of preservation of the floating city. Because the floating city had been transformed by the ant race, its appearance had changed greatly, but there were still many things preserved inside. They needed to count them before deciding what could be transported away. Motor City. In a library that covered an area of hundreds of acres, 3 witches were registering at the door. Lena, a young witch with a beautiful face, greeted her companion, then asked, "How's your research on elemental fusion and mutation going? I heard that after you finish it, you can borrow the library's information on level 6 spells and metamagic abilities, right?" Chapter 931. A stable portal opened at the edge of the beehive. Not far away, teams of Fermi ant workers were moving things. These large ants that only weighed 70 pounds had amazing strength. Almost every one of them was as strong as a human Hercules. Fallen Witch next to him was in charge of cleaning and counting. At the same time, she was reorganizing the golems and teleporting them back to Motor City. Be careful. These things can't be shaken. Fallen Witch was like a diligent little bee at this moment. She carefully checked everything that was transported. When she noticed Soren approaching, she smiled and said, "I didn't expect there to be an elemental fission device here. It seems that the plan to go to Sigil City can be delayed a lot." Soren smiled and nodded. For mortals, gods were almost omnipotent. There were some areas in the multiverse that could not be touched. Sigil City was one of them. Unless the Lady of Pain, who was in charge of Sigil City, allowed Soren to enter. Otherwise, with Soren's identity as a god, Sigil City was forbidden to him. And it was well known that the Lady of Pain was very unfriendly to most gods. Soren had no contact with her, so it was a very risky move to enter Sigil City. As one of the oldest existences, the Lady of Pain should be stronger than the God of Light in Sigil City. As for leaving Sigil City, no one knew because she never seemed to come out. Soren maintained control of the Ant Queen because of the power of divinity, so there was no problem in leaving everything to the Fallen Witch. Moving the entire floating city was a huge project. Even with the help of the Thaling and the ants, it would take at least a week. Soren couldn't waste a week here, so he was ready to go back to Motor City to prepare for the next test of the battle flag plane and the second phase of the construction of his own kingdom. Shadow Kingdom. After half a month of construction, this barren country after the fusion had undergone a great change. First of all, the power of Shadow began to assimilate the kingdom. The gray area formed by the repulsion caused by divine power and priesthood gradually disappeared. The entire God's kingdom no longer looked like two worlds forcibly pieced together. Instead, it gradually showed signs of merging into one. Then there was the interior of the divine kingdom, especially near the reincarnation pool. The number of shadow beings had greatly decreased. Originally, the shadow god would transform himself into a shadow form, so the interior of his kingdom was very close to the shadow plane. However, Soren did not do so his kingdom was filled with many bright colors. Some of the shadow beings were killed. The other portion that could be captured and converted were sent into the pool of reincarnation under the heroic spirit's control. They were then converted into Soren's petitioners. Now, a city of about 10 square kilometers had been built in the divine kingdom. Some petitioners had formed an army to patrol and protect it, while the heroic spirits were still in charge of dealing with other dangers in the divine kingdom. Unlike the cities in material planes, the most important thing in a divine kingdom city was its temple. Other than the houses where the petitioners lived, the most eye-catching signs in the city were the temples of various sizes. Every day, petitioners would come to the temples to pray. However, the divine power gathered from their faith would not be sent to Soren. Instead, it would be left in the divine kingdom, turning into a golden light that shrouded the temple. In the future, this power would be used by Soren to expand the size of the divine kingdom. It was necessary to understand the life form of the petitioners in detail. Good believers who were devout in life would be brought to their respective divine kingdoms by the oracles after death to be reborn. This was a new life form and they would obtain eternity in the divine kingdom. The petitioners were similar to those who entered heaven after death, provided that they believed in a good God. However, they were generally not allowed to leave the divine kingdom. Many petitioners would never be able to leave the divine kingdom in their lifetime. After the death of their God, the petitioners would also die forever. In some cases, the petitioners would also become the petitioners of the other gods who killed their God. Note, this was similar to Soren's reincarnation ceremony of the shadow god's believers. The petitioners were obligated to protect their God, and if necessary, they were even required to participate in the divine war. As a new life form, petitioners needed to breathe and eat, but they were not as dependent as mortals. Some forms of petitioners did not need to eat or breathe because they were essentially life forms transformed from gods. As the cornerstone of the divine kingdom, most petitioners retained the characteristics of mortals. They needed to rest, but they did not need to rest as often as mortals. Petitioners could work for a long time, so many demons and devils liked to imprison petitioners to work as slaves. During peacetime, most petitioners lived a leisurely life. They could do whatever they liked in the divine kingdom and build their own homes and kingdoms. Because they had a long lifespan, any petitioner would have hundreds of years to squander until they were integrated into the divine kingdom and became an eternal entity. Of course, the most important thing for a petitioner was to please the God they served. Most of the time, the petitioners wanted to please the God they believed in exchange for a higher status and more power in the divine kingdom. Eventually, they would be promoted to become a God's messenger or a God's follower. The petitioners in Soren's divine kingdom only needed to rest for 1 or 2 hours every day. They did not need much food because energy could be used to replenish their energy consumption. Of course, food was also a form of enjoyment for them, but it was not necessary for them to survive. This way the petitioners had enough time to work. They had to prove their worth in the early stages of the divine kingdom in exchange for more opportunities to be promoted. Recently, many petitioners had been promoted to become heroic spirits. Becoming a heroic spirit meant that they would have a higher status, more enjoyment, and a longer lifespan in the future. Every divine kingdom was like a pyramid. Most of the gods who were on the side of order would leave a clear path of promotion in the divine kingdom. Soren's current system was petitioners, heroic spirits, holy spirits, God's messengers, God's servants, God's followers, and God's followers. Every time a petitioner was promoted, there would be a fundamental change. As Soren's servants, some of them had the potential to become gods. Currently, there was an army of about 1,000 people in the divine kingdom. Nearly half of them were heroic spirits, and the rest were petitioners who had enough battle experience before they died. Soren promoted a Holy Spirit priest. She was the half-elf female priest who died in the attack of the abomination. Her nature was far inferior to Milan, but there were too few Holy Spirits in the divine kingdom at the moment. He could only make an exception and promote one. The Holy Spirit priest was responsible for running the city. Currently, all the petitioners' task was to expand their territory, gradually gain control of the divine kingdom, and increased the number of petitioners to prepare for Soren's return to the Divine Kingdom in the future. Currently, there were a large number of wild petitioners in the Divine Kingdom. Some of them believed in the original god of the half-elves and rogues, while others believed in the god of shadow. These petitioners were all enemies before they were converted. According to the collected data, there were tens of thousands of petitioners wandering around the Divine Kingdom. Because this place contained the accumulation of the gods for thousands of years, Soren still needed enough time to convert them. In the evening, teams of troops returned, and at the same time, a large number of petitioners gathered in front of the temple. "My lord Soren, you are the master of the shadows. You are the protector of the half-elves. You are the master we will always serve and follow. My lord Soren, you are the incarnation of slaughter. You are the controller of disease. You bring fear to the enemy. You are our supreme ruler." Bursts of prayers echoed. With the prayers of the petitioners, there was a substantial golden light condensed. These converged faith power stayed in the temple and finally turned into real power. Although Soren could not enter the Divine Kingdom now, he maintained a trace of contact with the Divine Kingdom. As the number of petitioners increased, his connection with the Divine Kingdom became closer and closer. It was believed that as the Avatar crisis entered the later stage, the time for Soren to return to the Divine Kingdom would gradually come. At that time, there would be a whole new world waiting for him. In the end, what the Divine Kingdom would look like depended on what Soren wanted to build it. Mordor City. When Soren returned to the city of Mordor, the city hall was rebuilding the water supply system of the entire city. The arrival of the witches brought many changes to the city of Mordor. Because they needed contribution points to exchange for information in the library, many witches began to try to accept the tasks issued by the city hall. Most of these quests involved the application of magic in daily life. After Soren returned, he began to work on the transformation plan of the battle flag plane. It was not easy to obtain the divine power of slaughter in reality, because a large part of it was controlled by the god of war, and the slaughter in reality often brought about a decrease in population. Before defeating other gods of slaughter, Soren could not control much power, so the battle flag trial was a very important channel. Soren's initial idea was to add a will circle. Enchantment on the device connected to the battle flag trial would strengthen the willpower of the trial participants and activate it when they quit. This could greatly reduce the chance of death. The second was to expand the scale. The materials from the Githyanki's and the Fomites were enough for Soren to expand the number of trial devices. His initial estimate was to expand the scale to about 300 people. If the city of Mordor could guarantee that hundreds of people would participate in the trial every day, Soren would have dozens of more fanatics. This meant that there would be an additional 1 to 3 points of divine power every day. It didn't seem very impressive, but with the accumulation of numbers and time, Soren's divine power would be hundreds more than other gods. The gap in the future was even more unimaginable. P.S. I recently received an advertisement for a game. This book has not been recommended for more than half a year. If it were other authors, I'm afraid they would have hurriedly finished the book and started a new book. Fu Tu is now gritting his teeth and fighting hard. It's entirely because of your support that he can hold on until now. The summer vacation is here. Those who have pocket money can subscribe to support. By the way, ask for recommendation tickets and public accounts. There will be more tomorrow. Chapter 932. In a blink of an eye, it was almost July. For some reason, the climate had become more and more abnormal recently. A flood broke out in the tropical Amazon jungle, and it was said that it caused a lot of casualties to the fierce female warriors. The south coast was raging with wind, and a terrible tornado even destroyed a town directly. Although many people prayed to the sea goddess, the occasional typhoon and tsunami did not reduce at all, as if the power of the sea goddess was no longer useful at this moment. Even the peaceful Arendelle had a disaster. A terrible earthquake occurred near the king's city. Although the impact on Arendelle was not serious, there were thousands of casualties in another city. The abnormal climate made the gods uneasy. But there was no other way. Even the gods could only find ways to warn and then reduce the casualties as much as possible. During this period of time, even the drows were a lot more honest because there had been earthquakes in the Underdark during this time, and a city was directly buried. The Queen of Spiders could not mess around at this time, so she could only turn her attention to other crises first. Speaking of which, the traces of the demons had decreased a lot during this time. There was no doubt about it. The third wave of the Avatar crisis was over. But the fourth wave, elemental turmoil, had begun. This abnormal climate could only prove one thing, that was, the four ancient elemental gods may have come to the mortal world. When they fell, their divine power interfered with the elemental composition of the material plane, and eventually led to the abnormal climate of the entire material plane. It was a calm day. But it was only limited to a short while in the morning. At noon, the clear sky turned into dark clouds, and the wind blew the ships in the port. The fleets that went out to sea today quickly turned back to the port, and the captains were shouting for the sailors to run down the anchors and tie them to the pillars with strong ropes. The high priest stood outside the temple and looked at the distant sky. As a powerful psionic warlock, she seemed to feel something and ordered, "Let the believers gather at the temple. We may need to have a large prayer." At the same time, Soren's figure also appeared at the top of the arcane tower. Gloria soon appeared through the portal. As a legendary witch of prophecy, she had an innate sense of certain things that might happen. What happened? Gloria gently lifted her long hair and stood side by side with Soren. She murmured, "I've been feeling uneasy since this morning, as if something terrible is going to happen." Soren shook his head. "I don't know. But I also have a feeling that something will happen today." The divine sense told Soren that there was a big crisis in Mordor City today. This crisis might destroy Mordor City, so he could only stand here and wait for everything to come. The wind and rain became more and more frightening. The raging wind had passed through the protective barrier of Mordor City. Even with the protection of the temple, some roofs were still lifted. The power of the sea goddess seemed to have lost its effect at this moment. Originally, the sea was under her control, but today, no matter how her priests prayed, the sea near the port of Mordor was still turbulent, and there was no sign of it calming down. Boom! A terrifying vibration came from afar. It should be a place hundreds of kilometers away from Mordor City, but after it was transmitted to Mordor City, it was still a mess. Earthquake. Vivian looked up, and the next moment she appeared above the arcane tower. The little girl had recently been learning how to become a god, and Saruman was also learning with her. At present, Vivian was only one step away from becoming a god, but she needed to learn a lot, far more than Soren needed to master. "You guys stay here." Soren did not have the energy to pay attention to other things at this time. His figure turned into a golden light, and then appeared above Mordor City. Saint form. With a golden beam of light made of divine power rising, the sky above Mordor City was covered by a layer of transparent energy field. Gloria also stood up and said to Vivian next to her, "Vivian, come and help me activate the magic lock. This storm is amazing. I'm afraid it will cause great damage to Mordor City." The arcane tower rose. In the lavender light of magic, Gloria started the elemental furnace, and at the same time, an invisible protective force expanded rapidly, and soon covered the entire city of Mordor, resisting the increasingly terrible storm outside and reducing the damage suffered by Mordor City. This is not a natural power at all. Saruman's expression was solemn, and he quickly rushed to the temple area to see what he could do to help. At this time, near the port of Mordor City, just 10 meters away, the waves were already 7 or 8 meters high, and some boats that did not have time to return sank directly. And inside the energy shield, countless people watched all this in horror, looking at the scene outside as if it was the end of the world. Some people turned their heads to look at the golden figure above Mordor City, and they were glad that they had the protection of the gods at this moment. Countless believers gathered automatically. Many believers who were not Soren also came near the temple and prayed under the guidance of the priest. This was a disaster. A terrible disaster like the end of the world. At this moment, as mortals, they had no power to resist. They could only pray devoutly that the gods could shelter them through this crisis. "My Lord Soren, you are the master of shadows. You are the master of Mordor. You are the protector of the half-elves. My Lord Soren, you are the keeper of order. You are the only true god of the rogues. Your enemies will have nowhere to hide. My Lord Soren, your name will become sacred in the mortal world. You led us through the crisis. You gave us a stable and orderly life. You are the master of shadows. You are a wise ruler. You are the protector of the half-elves. Killing will make you stronger. The death of the enemy will spread your glory. Your kingdom will protect our souls. When death comes, the servants who serve you will be reborn in your kingdom. My Lord Soren, you will lift up your kingdom. Turn into the stars in the sky." The majestic sounds of prayer converged into a single sound. In the end, It turned into a pale golden divine power that shrouded the top of the temple and transferred to Soren's golden avatar to resist the terrible storm outside. The shaking gradually stopped. It seemed that the earthquake in the distance had ended, but Soren did not feel relieved. Instead, his face became more dignified, because he felt that the crisis that would destroy Mordor was getting closer and closer. He frantically extracted the power stored in the temple, and then directly turned himself into divine form. A golden giant of hundreds of meters high appeared over Mordor. At this moment, even Gloria could not help but tremble, because she felt the gap between herself and Soren at this moment, the huge gap between a mortal and a true god. Soren had never mobilized his divine power so crazily. But he knew that he had no way out at this moment, because in a farther place, he saw a wave hundreds of kilometers long on the horizon by the sea. Tsunami. Soren finally knew where the source of the disaster that had been bringing him the destruction of Mordor was. The four elemental gods fell into the mortal world, and their divine power directly changed the climate of the material plane. The earthquake just now was either a volcanic eruption or a continental shelf movement. Because Mordor was located in the outer islands, when such a disaster happened, the consequences were even more terrifying. Time passed little by little. Countless faith power gathered on Soren's body, and the situation at this moment could not be changed by any legendary profession. The only thing that could change all this was the gods. The terrible tsunami was gradually approaching. As if the end of the world was coming, the entire sky of Mordor was dark. This time, the tsunami wavelength reached hundreds of kilometers. Not only Mordor but the entire south coast, the entire outer islands, and the entire Amazon rainforest were within the scope of this tsunami. But at this time, Soren had no energy to care about other places. Mordor was the foundation of everything. And according to the location of the tsunami, Mordor should be the most severely damaged place. The terrible tsunami was approaching at an amazing speed. When it appeared in the sight of the residents of Mordor, countless people screamed in horror. A huge wave of more than 100 meters high approached the coastline. Such a height was enough to easily destroy everything. The energy it contained could flatten the entire city of Mordor and turn all of Soren's efforts for so long into nothing in an instant. At this moment, Soren could not help but feel lucky that he happened to be in Mordor at this moment. In the face of such a terrible natural disaster, the power of any mortal was useless. Only the gods could fight against it, and only the gods could use their power. Divine form. Soren's figure took a step forward, and in the blink of an eye, he had turned into a golden giant more than 300 meters high. He looked like the ancient Titan. Change space, power of divinity. Change reality, power of divinity. Change form, power of divinity. Regional divine shield. Soren's figure appeared over the port of Mordor. He opened his arms as if he wanted to hold up the whole sky. A golden divine shield opened with him as the center, covering the entire island of Mordor in an instant, and the monstrous wave of more than 100 meters in front of him had arrived. The life and death of Mordor would be destroyed at this moment of collision. P.S. First update. Please recommend me. Chapter 933. In front of the catastrophe, the power of mortals was so small. Only at this moment did mortals feel the greatness of the gods, and the great power of the true gods. Soren's golden giant directly cut the terrible tsunami from the middle. In the collision of huge energy, the golden divine shield kept shaking, but there was no sign of breaking. On the other side, the tsunami with a wavelength of hundreds of kilometers and the residual waves from the island of Mordor were being consumed by the divine shield, and finally turned into countless waves. The moment the tsunami passed, Soren's huge golden figure shook, and then his body appeared as if he had exhausted all his strength and fell from the sky. Gloria appeared beside him in an instant and quickly hugged Soren, who was falling from the sky. As the terrible tsunami passed, the city of Mordor gradually returned to calm. Soren's face looked a little pale at the moment. He seemed to be a little weak and said, "I'm fine. I'm just a little exhausted. Send someone to the sea temple immediately. This tsunami will not end so easily. Only the sea goddess can stop the disaster." Gloria hugged Soren tightly and whispered, "I'll send someone now. Don't talk, you need to have a good rest." The divine power of the entire city of Mordor was exhausted. All the temples lost their pale golden brilliance. Soren almost used up all the stored divine power when he was in the form of a true god. But after the terrible disaster was over, the entire island of Mordor burst into cheers. Then, a little bit of golden divine brilliance gathered again. With the joy of the believers after surviving the disaster, the ripples of divine power appeared again over the temple. At the same time, on the coastline of Port Tylon, the terrible tsunami was gradually approaching the entire south coast. Countless priests of the sea temple gathered, and many Naga sirens also appeared on the sea. A golden figure rose from the bottom of the sea. The goddess of ocean held a trident and turned into a 100-meter-tall giant on the sea. She looked at the huge waves in the distance and frowned as if she was thinking about something. When the huge waves gradually approached, she waved the trident in her hand and slashed forward. An invisible divine power spread. Under the effect of the sea, the huge waves of hundreds of meters high directly reduced by more than 20 meters. The gods were all in the form of saints. In the face of such a terrible disaster, even the sea goddess could not eliminate it without entering the form of a god. A dazzling brilliance appeared on the golden trident. The goddess of ocean gritted her teeth and waved her hand again. The terrible waves then shrank down by more than 30 meters. Now the height of the tsunami was only about 50 meters, and most of its power had been dissolved by her. Storm Lord, how long are you going to watch? Until the entire Amazon rainforest is submerged by the tsunami? As if she had consumed a lot of divine power, the tone of the goddess of ocean was not friendly. She said to the sky covered by dark clouds, "Let the storm consume part of the power of the tsunami. Otherwise, thousands of your believers will die." Rumble. It was accompanied by thunder. The figure of the storm lord appeared in the sky. He frowned and looked at the tsunami in the distance. Then he turned into a golden giant, opened his own power, and smoothed out the tsunami with the power of the storm. If he had not fallen into the mortal world, he might not have been willing to do so much for the mortals. Because the gods had a long time to cultivate new believers, but now he had fallen into the material plane, so the importance of the mortal believers was self-evident. The intensity of the tsunami was reduced again. But neither the sea goddess nor the storm lord wanted to consume too much of their divine power in this disaster because it meant that they would be very weak for a period of time in the future. So when the tsunami approached the south coast, it was still tens of meters high, enough to easily destroy everything in the coastal area. The sea goddess and the storm lord seemed to have given up on ordinary people. This intensity of the tsunami was almost a death situation for ordinary people, but for many powerful professionals, the chances of survival were still very high. They did not want to consume too much of their divine power, so it was enough to reduce the intensity of the tsunami to a level where it would not hurt the foundation. If they wanted to completely wipe out this tsunami, it would be difficult for them to do so even if they exhausted their power. But, just when the sea goddess and the storm lord seemed to be ready to give up, a bright light suddenly appeared in the distant sky, and then the sun penetrated the heavy fog and sprinkled directly on the whole earth. God of light. A golden figure fell from the light, and behind him was the light of the sun. The shadow of mountain paradise appeared behind him. He looked at the gods in front of him and slowly said, "This is a disaster brought by the gods. It should not be transferred to the mortals." There was no sadness or joy. The god of light finished this sentence very calmly, and then turned into a golden figure and pointed his finger at the tsunami approaching the coastline. The surging divine power emerged. It was as if the space laws of the entire material plane had been changed at this moment. The mountain paradise behind the god of light seemed to have become solid. Under the terrifying power that was so strong that it made the other gods pale, the tsunami that was approaching countless mortals and could bring destruction to them at any time was wiped out by the god of light just like that. Shocking. Unimaginable terrible power. A tsunami with a wavelength of hundreds of kilometers and a height of tens of meters was directly wiped out by the god of light with his divine power. Is this the great divine power? The sea goddess was full of shock, because even if it was not because of the Avatar crisis, it was impossible for her, who was in charge of the sea, to wipe out such a disaster so easily. At this moment, she felt a huge gap, which was more unimaginable than a great divine power. The sea goddess humbly lowered her head. Even the furious storm lord was silent, because he also realized that there was a huge gap between himself and the god of light. They were both gods with great divine power, but the power that the god of light had just shown was far beyond his estimation. That was a realm that only a great divine power could reach. It was a power that could change a world with a raise of the hand. The figure of the god of light gradually dissipated. It was as if this matter was nothing to him. Perhaps for gods at this level, they were not only concerned about the material plane, but the changes of the whole multiverse. The terrible disaster was over. But the shock left by the god of light was still fermenting. The storm lord left silently, and no one knew what he was thinking. The sea goddess sank to the bottom of the sea again. As a god very close to a great divine power, she had a real understanding of the great divine power at this moment. At this moment she could not help but think of Father Oak, who had chosen to sacrifice himself to save the entire material plane. Perhaps the power he showed at that moment was more shocking than it was today. Soren was also watching all this silently. He was not surprised that the god of light would finally make a move, because it was Father Oak and the god of light who worked together to break the dust that shrouded the material plane. No matter how to evaluate the god of light, he was always a god with his own principles, and he would never sit back and watch the material plane be destroyed. What a huge gap. As the figure of the god of light disappeared, Soren's spirit also returned to the city of Moder. As an old god who had existed for a long time, the strength of the god of light was difficult for Soren to estimate. Because as early as the ancient times, the god of light was the sun god. Later, he fell and was reincarnated as the light of dawn, Luashanda, and then merged with the power of mountain paradise to become the god of light. God knew how much divinity such an ancient god had accumulated. Unless Soren gathered the power of the three gods of death, it was impossible for him to fight against him. If there was a classification of the great divine powers, then the god of light was undoubtedly the one closest to the great divine power. In terms of quantity alone, the power of the god of light should be equivalent to that of three other greater divine powers. At present, there should be no one among the gods who could fight with him. Even the Lady of Night should not be his opponent. The only one who was qualified to fight with him head-on was probably the Lord of Hell, Asmodeus. One was the embodiment of eternal justice. The other was the ultimate source of evil. The outbreak of the Avatar crisis seemed to be destined to have a fierce collision. What was the cause of such a huge disaster? Gloria's voice sounded in Soren's ears. What had just happened seemed to make her feel a lingering fear. Soren turned to look at her and said slowly, "The four elemental ancient gods have fallen to the mortal world." Before all this broke out, Soren was not sure whether the four elemental ancient gods had fallen to the mortal world. But at the moment of fighting against the terrible tsunami, Soren was sure that the four elemental ancient gods must have fallen now. Water, fire, earth, and air. The four elemental ancient gods fell to the mortal world, and the creatures in the elemental plane lost control. The violent power led to the elemental turmoil. So, the material plane would usher in the first batch of violent elemental creatures. The four elemental ancient gods rarely left the elemental plane. On the one hand, they did not like to move around, and on the other hand, they needed to suppress the power of the elemental plane. Because the four elemental planes represented their own extremes, without the power of the elemental ancient gods to control, the power of the four elemental planes was easy to be imbalanced. And the final result was to affect all the elemental creatures. It was like if the queen of the ants died, all the Fermi ants would lose control and go berserk. PS1, second update. PS2, I don't know if the character you created in Invincible Legend is right. It is said that someone's nickname is Futu, update quickly. Damn. I heard that someone wanted to go to the enemy country to PK me. You underestimate me. Number 22, you are facing the entire Futu army. Chapter 934. The cause of the tsunami was finally figured out. After personally going to the sea to investigate, Soren found that near the whirlpool where the floating city fell, an underwater volcano erupted at an alarming rate. At the same time, there were also a large number of water elementals nearby. These water elementals were very violent and full of aggression. Even the nearby sea monsters were attacked by them. There was no doubt that after losing the control of the elemental god, many elementals without much wisdom entered a period of rage. Most elementals did not have a specific personal consciousness. Generally, when they were promoted to the level of Jinn, these elementals would be as smart as humans. As for other low-grade elementals, they basically acted on instinct. Mordor City seemed to have returned to peace. However, after the tsunami disaster, everything in Mordor City had changed a lot. For example, Soren's believers. During this time, the number of Soren's believers had skyrocketed, especially among the half-elves. Almost 90% of the half-elves had become Soren's believers, and there were also a large number of devout believers. Soren never asked for forced belief because belief had to be voluntary. 10 shallow believers were only the power of faith provided by one devout believer, so if there were half-elves who believed in other gods, Soren basically would not interfere. But now the proportion of half-elves who believed in Soren was quite high, and the number of devout believers had directly increased by more than 50%. The so-called devout believers were the kind of believers who would formally pray every day. As for the fanatics, they completely regarded the gods as their everything. The proportion of fanatics in Soren's church had also increased by a lot. And all of this was brought about by the day of the tsunami when he transformed into his true god form and exhausted all the gods to save Mordor City. Although Soren's divine power was almost exhausted at that time, his divine power recovered very quickly. The believers' prayers became several times more active. Soren was recovering his divine power at almost twice the speed in the past, and this momentum continued to increase. In general, Soren's move this time was correct. City Hall. An official came to the city hall in a hurry, then found the minister in charge of construction and said, "Sir Raffle, something strange has happened near the quagmire in the south." This is the report they sent back. "We don't have a way to deal with it, so we'd like you to pass it to Her Excellency Gloria." The official named Raffle took a look at it, and his expression immediately became solemn. He said in a deep voice, "Got it? I'll report this to Lady Gloria immediately." After he finished speaking, he walked toward the city lord mansion. He didn't have the right to see Gloria directly. He had to wait for an attendant to inform him. Soon he was brought into a study. Then Gloria's figure appeared. However, it was not her real body, but an avatar created by the simulacrum spell. Since Soren discovered the spell simulacrum from the ancient ruins, Gloria dealt with most of the things in Mordor City through her avatar. This was also the key to the Great Arcanists during the Arcane Empire's period. Gloria took a look at the report and said with a solemn expression, "Gravity anomaly? Is it over the quagmire?" "Okay, I see. You can go now." After that, Gloria's figure disappeared. The next moment, her real body temporarily stopped the experiment in her hand and went directly to Soren's side. After this period of recovery, Soren's exhausted divine power has been replenished a lot. He was now studying the improvement plan of the battle flag plane because the next test was about to begin. When Gloria arrived, he couldn't help but raise his head and said, "What's wrong? You look a bit serious." Gloria handed the report to Soren and said softly, "There's an anomaly near the quagmire in the south. The gravity in that place is distorted, and we don't know what happened yet." Gravity distortion? Soren also became serious when he heard this. He took a look at the report and said, "I see. Leave this to me. You should focus on studying elemental fission." Gloria nodded and then disappeared. At present, whether Mordor City could float or not depended on her and the fallen witch's research progress. If elemental fission was successfully cracked, Mordor City could soon be upgraded to a floating city. Soren fixed the last few runes, then got up and left the battle flag plane. The gravity anomaly must be related to the elemental plane. Under normal circumstances, the gravity of a plane was different. Using the material plane as a standard, the gravity of the lower plane was obviously much higher, and the gravity of the spiritual plane was only about 80% of that of the material plane. Greater teleportation. The entire city of Mordor had been set up with leyline nodes. See Mordor City second phase transformation plan for details. Soren could teleport to any place in Mordor City at any time. As long as he mastered these leyline nodes, any ability that could cast teleportation spells could get a connection point to the teleportation network of Mordor City. When he appeared, a lot of people had gathered near the quagmire. As if they were performing a monkey show, these people's movements were a little slow, as if even walking was very difficult for them. Elemental anomaly. Soren's god-level perception immediately found the problem. The gravity here was about twice that of the material plane. Under normal circumstances, this kind of thing was absolutely impossible because the gravity of the material plane was affected by the elemental channel. The only explanation for the gravity anomaly here was that a channel connected to the Earth elemental plane was formed here. The gravity of the Earth elemental plane was special. As a plane with a challenge rating of 15 or above, the gravity of the Earth elemental plane was about twice that of the material plane. In some places, the gravity may reach more than 10 times. Ordinary people could not even stand, let alone walk. This quagmire originally had a group of sludge monsters, but they had been cleaned up by Mordor City a long time ago. These were the coordinates of the fourth phase of the transformation. Now, within about a kilometer, the gravity was obviously more serious than other places, and it could be felt immediately after entering the range. My lord, Sir Soren, the great Lord of Shadows. All kinds of names were called. Because of the gravity anomaly here, not only the officials of Mordor City came, but also many witches came to see. Soren waved his hand and said, "Okay. You can go down. I'll take care of it." This level of event was not something that ordinary people could intervene in. At least, only legendary spellcasters with half-planes could deal with it. If there was really a channel connecting to the Earth elemental plane, then Soren would need to use the power of the divine spark to space change and temporarily seal it completely. Otherwise, as the channel was opened, the Earth elementals would soon find this coordinate, and then Mordor City would have to face elemental turmoil. P.S. First update. Chapter 935. Saint Form. A pale golden light appeared in Soren's sight. He looked down at the quagmire with a diameter of about 1 kilometer from the air. This place was close to a valley, far from the gathering place of the sludge monsters. However, the construction of Mordor could not allow the existence of such unexpected creatures, so they had been wiped out about last year. Now there were no traces of the sludge monsters in this quagmire. At most, there were some small animals. But now there were no small animals, and there were almost no living things in the abnormal gravity range. The only thing that could be felt was that the earth elemental energy here was very abundant. Casting the spell, Stone to Mud, here should be able to improve the casting effect a lot. Found it. After Soren looked at the area, he finally found the problem. There was a muddy pit that was invisible to the naked eye. It looked a bit like a swamp. There was a very strong energy field below it. It was likely that the passageway was connected to this place. Space change, divinity ability. With a golden light, Soren directly used his divine power to break the illusion covered by the material plane in front of him. Then the overlapping space appeared in front of him, and a deep crack appeared in his eyes. If he wanted to see the situation, he could only enter it. This is the place of buried treasures. This is the wall against all enemies. This is the tomb of the greedy. The elemental plane of Earth was a solid plane made up of rocks, mud, and stones. Travelers who were not alert enough or prepared enough might feel that they were buried alive in this huge, solid tomb, and that their lives would end with them being crushed. His crushed body left a warning for anyone who was stupid enough to follow. Although the elemental plane of Earth had a strong and non-ductile nature, the hardness of the elemental plane of Earth was diverse, from relatively soft soil to heavier and more valuable metal veins. Granite, volcanic rock, marble, fragile crystal, and soft gravel were intertwined together. Rough and huge gem mines were sparsely distributed in this plane. These unpolished gems often tempted greedy people to come to this plane, wanting to dig out gems with minimal effort. Those with this purpose often encountered the natives of the elemental plane of Earth as enemies, and some even left their bones here forever. The elemental plane of Earth was a place that was hostile to creatures from the main material world, but it was not as active as the elemental plane of fire. It was as patient as the Earth itself, and it had all the time in the universe to wait. The 4 elemental planes were born from the origin of the multiverse. This was a place full of endless wealth, and it even had mines far richer than the bottomless abyss. Soren passed through the space crack in front of him, and a light appeared in front of him. He was already in an open gravel area. The gravity here was about twice that of the material plane, and many valuable things could be seen within sight, such as white marble and open-air metal ore. Among the 4 elemental planes, exploring the Earth elemental plane was the most valuable because it was a plane with endless wealth. Lucky people could even find gems as big as a fist on the roadside. There were records of this. There were adventurers who once explored the elemental plane of Earth. One of them wandered for 3 hours, and then found a fist-sized ruby on the roadside. The elemental plane of Earth contained many treasures. It had the densest gem mines in the multiverse, the easiest metal ore to mine in the multiverse, and an abundant amount of almost all kinds of stone. For example, the land in front of Soren was undoubtedly rich in marble, as well as a large number of open-air metal mines near the hills on the side. Gold, silver, copper, iron, tin, almost all of the minerals could be found in the elemental plane of Earth, and they were very easy to mine. They did not even need to go deep underground. There were abnormally rich mineral reserves within 100 meters of the surface. Of course, it was not easy to make a fortune in the elemental plane of Earth. Even the demons did not dare to swagger in. At most, they would sneak in to mine something. Because there were many powerful and dangerous existences in the elemental plane of Earth. For example, the giant Earth elemental that was angrily attacking Soren. Because it was located in the elemental plane, the strength of this giant Earth elemental was at least 30% higher. Its challenge level was close to level 18, and it required half a legendary team to deal with it. And because of the gravity of the elemental plane of Earth, it was very inconvenient for most professions to move here. Death's Hand. Soren did not have the patience to break a giant Earth elemental, so he directly used Death's Hand to take it away. He needed a little time to observe here. It shouldn't be the core area of the elemental plane of Earth, because the gravity is not more than 5 times that of the material plane. Soren looked down at the land in front of him and murmured, "It seems that this area is very valuable. An unusually rich marble mine as well as a large number of open-air ores. If they can be mined, the strength of the city of Mordor will greatly increase." Unfortunately, Soren just thought about it and gave up. On one hand, it was the danger of the elemental plane of Earth. New elemental life could be born here at any time. Another reason was the gravity here. In the case of twice the gravity, the laborers of Mordor City could not work at all, and Mordor City did not have such technical conditions to rely on golems to mine. It seemed that such a large open-air mine could only be abandoned here. The characteristics of the elemental plane of Earth were that it increased earth spells, weakened air spells, normal time, unlimited size, and could change shape. The sky of this plane was very low. For legendary professions, it was easy to touch the plane barrier, and the core area of this plane was the underground world. There were countless passages under the elemental plane of Earth, and the natives living here were abnormally strong. In the elemental plane of Earth, you must master 2 skills. One was mining and the other was digging. There was even a book that was circulated among adventurers. It was called Dig Your Way, a survival guide to the elemental plane of Earth. One thing must be mentioned here. Similar to other planes, the elemental plane of Earth was not all in the form of Earth elemental in the eyes of ordinary people. There were also souls that were reincarnated into the elemental plane, as well as the natives who were assimilated by the Earth elemental energy. Their souls were assimilated by the Earth elemental energy, and eventually became similar to half-elemental life. The enemies that could be encountered here were half-Earth elemental Deinonychus, half-Earth elemental Medusa, half-Earth elemental Minotaur, half-Earth elemental Troll, half-fusion lava monster, stone monster, and earth djinn, etc. Change space, divinity. Change reality, divinity. Soren returned to the material plane. In order to avoid trouble, he temporarily sealed the crack, but this kind of crack was difficult to completely erase, and he did not know when it would open again. For the time being, Soren could only seal it first and see how to deal with it in the future. After all, the mineral wealth of the elemental plane of Earth was amazing. If possible, Soren still wanted to dig something out of it. Just when Soren finished sealing the elemental crack and was about to return to the city of Mordor, he suddenly froze in place, and then his expression suddenly became very strange. Because, just now, just at that moment, he actually perceived the magic net and connected with it again. P.S. Second update. Looking for recommendation tickets, looking for subscriptions. You're tuning in to the Han Lee's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.